Welcome to a new journey where we return together again to a deep inner stillness and connection. Let's share a little. Where are you listening from? And what time is it? It's touching to think that, even though each person is in a different part of the world, at this moment we are finding our own peaceful space together, in the midst of the chaos of life and the constant flow of thoughts. Let these timeless teachings gently lead you to complete relaxation. Tonight, we're going to explore ancient wisdom, the lessons that Buddhist masters have passed down over the centuries to help people find peace, calm their turbulent minds, and spark healing energy within. I will send you a selection of profound Zen stories, preserved and passed down as lamps that illuminate the path of those who seek inner peace. Each story is a divine teaching, awakening your natural ability, the ability to let go of anxiety and stress and find the stillness that exists. Unlike conventional methods of relaxation, these ancient teachings do not require experience or meditation skills. They are simply a gentle reminder that peace does not lie outside, but arises from your own heart. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Don't look for it anywhere else. In the coming moment, you will feel the meaning of that teaching more clearly and know how to bring it into your own experience. As we walk through the stories of seekers, of compassion and awareness, you will feel that something beautiful is gradually unfolding. Your shoulders will become more relieved, your natural breathing deeper, and your mind will begin to calm down. Let yourself be relaxed, completely rested in that silence, a place where you can truly return to yourself. At the foot of Mount Myogi, where the morning mist wraps around the trunks of old cedar trees like an endless strip of white silk, there is a small hut made of bamboo and rotten pine wood. The low roof of the tent, covered with green moss, was just high enough for a man to stand upright without having to bow his head. The door is two loose laminated boards, no locks, no locks. The wind blew through the gap, singing in hoo-hoo sounds like bamboo flutes. The person in the tent was named Ryokan. No one remembered how old he was, only that his hair was almost gray, but his eyes were still as clear as spring water. He had no disciples, no temples, no titles. The villagers at the foot of the mountain only called him Ryokan Sensei in a respectful voice with a hint of curiosity. It is rumored that he was once a high official in Edo, and some say that he was the son of a samurai giant, but then he gave it all up to go to the mountains to live as a beggar. No one dared to ask directly. They only know that every time they bring rice, salt, or radishes to donate, he smiles kindly and returns half of it, saying, "Enough, enough." At dawn that day, as usual, Ryokan woke up before the chicken crowed. He sat cross-legged on a torn mat, his back straight, his hands lightly resting on his knees. The first rays of sunlight passed through the gap in the door, shining on his face in a pale golden aura. He inhaled, exhaled, slowly as if caressing each breath. After that, he got up, opened the door, and bowed to the sparrow perched on the pine branch on the veranda. "Good morning, little friend," he said, his voice hoarse but warm. Ryokan has nothing to call his. A chipped bowl is used for eating rice and drinking tea. A patched brown robe, cold in winter and hot in summer, but he wore it for 10 years. 3 manuscripts wrapped in an old cloth on a bamboo table, and a thin mourning mat to sleep on. That's it. Yet every time someone visits, they feel that the space is filled with something very big, very warm, and cannot be named. At noon, he went down to the stream to get water. The spring water was bitterly cold. He scooped up a bamboo jar and sat by the rock, watching the water flow through his fingers. There was a buffalo herder child passing by. He called back, took out a slightly melted malt candy in his hand, and handed it to him. The child smiled and ran away. Ryokan watched, muttering a verse in his mouth. "Children laugh. Malt melt. Summer is back." In the afternoon, he took a walk in the forest. He stopped by the old cherry tree, reaching out to stroke each fallen petal. With the petals stuck to his hand, he raised them to the level of his eyes, smiling as if he had met his longtime friend again. Then he sat down under the tree, took out a piece of charcoal from his sleeve, and wrote on the piece of birch bark, "The flowers fall. I don't say it. I'm not sad. It's just a pity that the wind carries the incense away." In the evening, he went back to his tent and cooked a handful of rice balls with sesame salt. He ate slowly, chewing carefully, as if each grain of rice contained a whole field of ripe rice. After eating, he washed the dishes with spring water, dried them, and placed them neatly in the corner of the tent. Then he meditated for a while longer before laying down. That night, a full moon hung above the top of the mountain, so bright that every strand of moss could be clearly seen on the roof of the tent. At the same time, in the village at the foot of the mountain, there was a man named Denzo. He was 32 years old, thin, with bulging eyes and tanned skin. He used to work as a carpenter, but alcohol and gambling caused him to lose all his skills, his wife and children. Now he lives by petty theft. Tonight, he heard some drunk men in the pub say, "Ryokan in the mountains definitely has gold and silver treasures. How can a famous Zen master live in poverty?" Denzo nodded, and an image of a chest full of gold appeared in his mind. He sharpened his knife, tied a rope, waited for the moon to rise, and then snuck up the mountain. The mountain road is steep, the sharp stones cut into the bare feet. Denzo was panting, sweating profusely. He stopped by the stream to drink, saw the moonlight printed under the water, and suddenly a strange feeling rose in his heart, both thirst and fear. But the thought of gold and silver quickly quenched all hesitation. He continued to climb. It was almost midnight, and he arrived at the hut. The door is not locked. He pushed slightly, and the board made a start inside. Only the moonlight penetrated through the gap in the door and shone on the empty mat. Denzo groped every corner. He flipped through the mats, touched under the table, and searched through all 3 sutras. Nothing but old paper and ink. He sat down, his heart pounding. "No way!" he muttered. "There must be a safe. There must be a cellar." At that moment, the sound of slow footsteps sounded outside the mountain road. Denzo was startled and hurriedly slumped into the darkest corner, gripping the knife tightly. The door opens. Ryokan walked in, holding a small bundle of firewood in his hand. He put down the wood and lit a tiny candle with the fire bait he had brought with him. The candlelight flickered, shining on his face, as calm as the surface of a lake without ripples. Ryokan looked straight into the dark corner. "You have come a long way to visit me," he said, his voice as light as the wind. "It's cold at night. Don't let yourself catch a cold." Denzo stiffened. He waited for the screams, waiting for the stick, waiting for the villagers to rush over. But no, only that voice, strangely warm. Ryokan took off his outer robe, folded it neatly, and placed it on Denzo's trembling hand. "I only have this," he said. "You just take it away. It's old, but it's still warm." Denzo held his shirt, his mind spinning. He didn't know when he had run out of the tent. His foot stumbled several times on the mountain road, but he kept running, running forever, until he fell on the bank of the stream. The moonlight illuminated his face, tears running down his dirty cheeks. He hugged the robe in his lap, sobbing like a child. Left alone, Ryokan sits on the steps, naked from the waist up. The night wind was bitterly cold, but he did not feel cold. He looked up at the moon, his eyes sparkling. For a long time he whispered, his voice so low that only he and the moon could hear it. "Poor fellow, I gave you the shirt. I wish I could give you the whole moon." The next morning, the villagers saw Denzo sitting in front of the door of the village temple, still clutching his old robe tightly. He didn't say anything, just bowed his head deeply when asked. 3 days later, he paid off his wine debt and applied for a job as a forge. Every month, he brought a bundle of firewood to the mountain, placed it in front of the door of the Ryokan hut, and then quietly went down. He never kept the firewood, only laughed and distributed it to the poor houses in the village. As for Ryokan, he still lives the same. Still a bowl, a mat, a shirt. No, now he only has a thin undershirt. That winter was terribly cold, and the snow fell 3 meters thick. Someone brought him a cotton shirt. He accepted. And that night he quietly knocked at the door of Denzo's house, placed it on the porch, and accompanied him a piece of paper. Cold nights, wear them warm. The moon is still hanging there. It's not lost. Denzo held the shirt, trembling. He knelt in the snow, facing the mountain, and wore for a long time. Years later, when Ryokan was reduced to ashes under the cherry tree where he used to sit and write poetry, Denzo can still be seen going up the mountain on full moon day. He didn't bring any more firewood, only a chipped bowl, the one Ryokan used to use. He put the bowl down in front of the grave and sat quietly watching the moon. One night when the moon was so bright, he was heard whispering, "Teacher, I've already received the moon." The mountain wind blew through, bringing with it the scent of late cherry blossoms. Under the tree, the petals fell slightly, covering the old bowl with a pale pink color. The moon was still hanging there, full, bright, belonging to no one, and belonging to all. As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 empty words is a word that brings peace. The peace that Ryon embodies is available to each of us as we stop clinging and learn to rest in our own inherent wholeness. Now let's explore a Zen story that takes place in a quiet monastery where 20 monks and a nun named Isun practice meditation together under the guidance of their Zen master. Under the creeping oil lamp of the Kofukuji Mountain Stone Zen Hall, in the autumn of the 8th year of the Heavenly Treasure, the air was so cold that even the breath turned into mist. 20 monks sat in 2 opposite rows, their backs straight like 2 rows of ancient pines. Only the sound of soft breathing mixed with the sound of wooden bells ringing at regular intervals. In the east corner, the only nun in the monastery, Isun, affectionately known as Eshun, sits on an ash-colored pediment, her shaved head reflecting the candlelight into a small moon. Eshun had just turned 24. Her skin was as white as new rice. Her thin lips were always half closed like unbloomed lotus petals. But what makes all eyes unable to leave her is not her beauty, but the strange silence that exudes from every movement. When she lifted the tea bowl, the whole meditation hall seemed to stop breathing. When she put down the bowl, the sound of a light touch on the ironwood was clearly audible, like a chant that had just been recited. Among the 20 monks, there was a man named Dogen. Unlike the great Dogen, who was only a 32-year-old boy, the second Dogen. He was originally from an immigrant background. His father was the governor of Kyoto Prefecture, and his mother was the daughter of the Fujiwara family. Since childhood, he has been used to being cherished, praised, and looked at with admiring eyes. When he left the monastery, he thought that he would bring those eyes into the door of meditation. But no. In this meditation hall, all eyes were directed to the void, and no one looked at anyone for more than 3 seconds. There was only one exception, Dogen's gaze on Aishun. At first, it was just an accidental glance as she walked across the hallway. Then into 2. Then it became 100. He began counting the number of times she breathed during a meditation session. She began to remember every fold of her clothes. He began to imagine her voice, which he had never heard clearly, because nuns keep the vow not to talk to men. Every night, when the 4 great bells rang, he lay on the hard mat, his eyes open, his heart pounding like a festival drum. "This isn't lust," he said to himself. "This is love. Pure, noble love, only mentioned in the scriptures." He began to write letters. On sleepless nights, he sharpened the ink with trembling fingers, writing every small line like sesame seeds on the thinnest washi paper. "Dear Eshun, I have seen the moonlight in your eyes. I have heard the sound of prayer in your every step. I vow to break the precepts for you, to be perfect for your sake, and to burn all three holy organs for your sake to warm your hands this winter. He wrote page after page, then tore it up, rewrote it. In the end, only a small quarter-folded sheet remained, tied with red thread, the color of the pink silk that his mother used to tie for him when he was a child. On the morning of the 7th day after the settlement, after a quiet vegetarian meal, Dogen got up. 20 pairs of eyes looked at each other in surprise. He walked step by step on the creaking wooden floor, walking straight to where Eshin was washing dishes by the rock well. His hand trembled so much that the paper fell to the ground 3 times before handing it to hers. Eshin received the letter. She didn't open it right away. She only looked at him once. Her eyes were as clear as winter spring water, and then quietly put the letter in her sleeve and continued to wash the dishes. The sound of bowls touching each other jingled, but Dogen felt like the whole world had just fallen apart. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the hallway watching the full moon hanging from the curved tile roof, imagining all sorts of scenarios. She would answer, she would smile, she would flee to the mountain with him. The two of them would live in a thatched hut like Ryokan used to be. The next morning, as usual, the masses chanted early. When the last prayer was finished, Eshun stood up. No one understood what was going on. She walked out to the middle of the meditation hall, standing in the main hall, where the statue of Guanyin with 1,000 arms and thousands of eyes was quietly looking down. Her clothes were ash gray, but in the candlelight they were as bright as silver. She looked directly at Dogen. Her voice rang out, not loud, but so clear that every word seemed to be etched into the air. If you really love me as you wrote, then right now, in front of the monks, in front of the 3 jewels, get up, step forward, and embrace me. The whole meditation hall was silent. The sound of the wooden bell that was ringing in the middle suddenly broke off. A little boy dropped the stick to the ground, and the sound sounded like thunder. 20 pairs of eyes opened wide, without blinking. The abbot sat on high, his hand still on the bell, but he did not continue to knock. Dogen stood there, his face as red as a ripe gack. His heart was beating so hard that he could hear every beat in his ears. He wanted to walk. He had imagined this scene 100 times in his mind. He would run to her, hug her, and the whole world would burst into tears and applause. But now, under the gaze of 20 fellow disciples, under the stern gaze of the Guanyin statue, under the cold gaze of the lust itself that was disguised as love in his heart, his feet seemed to be nailed to the floor. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. No one breathes. Then Eshun smiled. A smile is not pity nor contempt. It was the smile of the person who had just cut through a thick layer of fog with a sharp blade. "That's enough," she said, her voice as soft as the breeze. "Have you woken up in a dream?" She turned around, walked back to her seat, and continued chanting as if nothing had happened. Dogen fell to his knees. Not because he was embarrassed in front of others, but because he had just seen himself, naked, ugly, full of greed, in the light of the 2 words, "really." 3 days later, Dogen asked the abbot for permission to go behind closed doors for 3 years in a retreat behind the mountain. No one stopped him. No one asked more. Every night, in a small apartment that could fit only 1 person, he wrote down his own story on an old leather notebook. He wrote Eshun's words over and over again, writing until the ink ran out, writing until the paper was torn, writing until he himself could no longer distinguish between words and tears. In the 3rd year, on a spring morning, when the cherry blossoms fell to fill the courtyard, Dogen opened the door. He walked out, his head shaved smoothly, his eyes shining as if he had just been washed by a spring. He went to the meditation hall, knelt in front of Eshun, and bowed his head deeply. "Thank you, Master," he said, his voice hoarse because he hadn't spoken in 3 years. "It has helped you see the true side of lust clearly." Eshun just smiled, still smiling, But this time, Dogen saw the spring sky in it. 15 years later, when Dogen had become a famous Zen master throughout the Ichigo region, the story of that day is still being told. Someone asked him, "Master, how much did you love Sister Eshin in the past?" Dogen laughed, his smile as light as a cloud. "I loved her enough to be grateful for the rest of my life. For it is that false love that helps us to find true love. A love that does not need to be embraced, does not need to possess, does not need anything but freedom." He paused for a moment, looked out at the golden rice fields out there, and then continued. "That day, if I walked up to hug her, I would probably be a loser forever in my life. Fortunately, I didn't take a step. The wind blew through, bringing with it the aroma of fresh rice and the sound of the afternoon prayer from the meditation hall. In the sound of the sutra, two words can be clearly heard echoing endlessly. That's enough. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. Only by not holding grudges can hatred be appeased. This is an eternal law. True love dissolves the boundaries between self and others, creating space for authentic connection to flourish. Let us now move on to a story that challenges our understanding of spiritual progress and sincere compassion. This is the story of the old woman's compassion test. Qingliang Mountain, Yunnan Province, winter in the 19th year of the Qianlong dynasty. The morning mist wrapped around the old pine trunks like a white mourning cloth. At the foot of the craggy cliff, a tiny thatched hut is nestled by a shallow stream. The roof of the tent was covered with green moss, the bamboo chimney smoked every afternoon, and the smell of brown rice and wild vegetables spread throughout the valley. People called it accidental because the monk who lived in it for more than 20 years never smiled, never said more than 3 sentences to anyone. The old woman surnamed Lu, known as Lu Mao by the villagers, was 71 years old. Her back was cuffed like a stone bridge. Her hands were as rough as the bark of an ironwood tree. 20 years ago, when she was 51, she met a young monk meditating under an old peach tree by the stream. He said he needed a quiet place to burn his body to ashes, to train his mind to reverence. She didn't ask much, just quietly chopped bamboo, cut wood, and erected this hut for exactly 7 days and 7 nights. Since then, every morning she carried rice, every afternoon she carried firewood, and every evening she lit an oil lamp on the veranda so that he would not get lost when he went on a journey. She had no children. Her husband died early from smallpox. People told her that she was crazy, abandoned the whole field and garden to raise a strange monk. She just smiled slightly. Raising a cultivator is sowing blessings for the next life. 20 years passed. Her hair was white, her eyes were fading, but her legs were still climbing the mountain. As for the monk, he still sat there, day after day, his back straight like a stone statue, his eyes closed, his lips tightly pursed. The villagers rumored that he had entered meditation, that he was about to become a Buddha, that just one look at him would destroy karma. But Lumo began to doubt. She saw that he never asked anyone, never looked at her once. There was a landslide. She was crushed by a rock and broke her leg, lying paralyzed for a month. He still sat still in the tent. There was a cold winter. She brought up a cotton shirt. He accepted it and threw it in the corner, saying something outside the body, "You don't need it." She began to wonder. 20 years of rice, 20 years of firewood. What can you feed in the end? A stone statue that breathes or a man who loves? That question simmered in her heart like embers under the ashes. That spring, she decided to test his heart one last time. She went to Xiao Mai, the most beautiful girl in the village, only 18. Her skin was as white as snow, her lips were as red as lipstick, and her eyes were as bright as stars. Tiao Mai is the child of a poor family. Her father is an alcoholic, her mother is seriously ill, and she often goes to the mountains to pick medicine. The old woman held her hand, her voice trembling. "Son, do me a favor. Come on, hug him tightly and ask, 'What now?' I just want to know, after 20 years of raising you, can you raise a heart? Xiao Mai blushed and hesitated. The old woman knelt down, her knees banging the cold ground. She knelt down and begged me. If he had some compassion, she would kneel down to thank heaven and earth. Else, then you are also resigned. Xiao Mai looked at the old woman's cloudy eyes and finally nodded. 3 days later, at the time of the rat, the moon was as bright as silver. Xiao Mai wore a white silk shirt, her hair was long, and she quietly climbed up to the temple. The old woman stood under an old pine tree, her hand clutching the bamboo stick, her heart pounding. The door opened. Xiao Mai walked in. The monk was still sitting there, motionless like a statue. She knelt down, gently wrapping her arms around him from behind. The warmth of the young girl spread through the coarse cloth coat. She whispered in his ear, her voice trembling. "What now, sir?" Silent. Then his voice rang out, as cold as the wind blowing through the crevices of the rocks. The ancient tree grows on the cold rock in winter. There is no warmth at all. Xiao Mai let go of her hand, and tears fell to the ground. She stood up, bowed her head, and quietly left the room. The old woman standing outside the door heard every word clearly. She didn't cry. She just quietly returned to the village, her eyes shining like two flames. The next morning, the villagers saw black smoke rising from Am Vu Tin. They ran up, leaving only a pile of bright red ashes. The 20-year-old hut was reduced to ashes. The monk sat in the middle of the ashes, his clothes scorched, but still motionless, his eyes closed, his lips pursed. The old woman stood 10 steps away, holding a bundle of burnt torches, her white hair flying in the wind. Her voice rang out, not loud, but the whole mountain and forest heard it. I raised you for 20 years, so that in the end there was only one cold verse. It's better to burn it than to let you sit there as a talking stone statue. The villagers were in a stir. Someone was about to rush in and drag her away, but she raised her stick to stop her. Don't let anyone feel sorry for him. He didn't need rice, he didn't need clothes, he didn't need love. He just needs the cold of the stone to be proud that he was accidental. The monk opened his eyes. For the first time in 20 years, he looked directly at the old woman. His eyes were deep, but there was no warmth at all. He slowly stood up, brushed the ashes off his shirt, and walked away. Didn't say a word. Don't look back. The old woman knelt down in the pile of hot ashes, her hands clasped over her face, sobbing. We don't have to cry because we regret the tent. We don't have to cry because we regret the effort. She cried because she finally understood. She had raised a meditative corpse. That summer, the monk did not return. It is rumored that he died in the deep forest or turned to stone by the stream. As for the old woman, she rebuilt a smaller hut right where it was. But this time she didn't feed anyone. Every morning she still carried rice to the mountains, but not for people, but for birds, squirrels, and hungry wild animals. Someone asked her, "Are you still angry with him?" The old woman smiled, her first smile in many years. "What are you angry about?" "I'm just sorry. For 20 years, I thought I was sowing the seeds of compassion, but it turned out that I was only sowing the seeds of a rock that can speak poetry." Then she looked at the pile of ashes that had grown green grass and continued softly. "Fortunately, I burned it. If I don't burn it, I'll probably be petrified too." The mountain wind blew through, bringing with it the scent of burning grass and the sound of the afternoon prayer from the distant village. In the sound of the sutra, a new verse was heard, composed by the old woman herself. Meditation is not compassionate, it is just a sitting corpse. Fire is the Buddha, burning the cold in people's hearts. We come across a story about the transformation of fear into strength. This is the story of big waves. In the third year of literature, 1856, Ado smelled of sea salt and coal smoke from the docking black ships. At the largest sumo training ground in Kanda Prefecture, he was called Onami, the big waves. Not because he was tall, He was only 1 meter and 7, but because when he stood on the practice ring, the whole world seemed to be swallowed up by him. In the closed training ground, Onami is the devil. His arms were like 2 pillars, and his hands were so big that they could shatter a horse's skull. Once he lifted his teacher, the legendary wrestler Raiden, above his head and gently put it down like a bowl. The brothers called him the unrivaled monster. But every time there is a public tournament, when thousands of eyes are on him, Onami transforms into a 15-year-old boy who leaves the village for the first time. His legs trembled, his knees collided with each other, his mouth was dry. And in just 3 seconds, the weakest opponent can knock him on his back. The audience's laughter was like 1,000 knives stabbing into the chest. Onami ran away from the ring, hiding in a dark corner, holding her face and crying like a child robbed of candy. I'm strongest when no one is looking. I'm the weakest when the whole world sees. That sentence haunted him for 3 years. That winter, Onami heard that there was a Zen master named Hakuin in Kamakura who made Edo's most famous mad swordsman kneel down and ask for refuge with a single sentence. Onami wrapped up her humiliation, carrying 200 silver coins, the entire 3-year bonus, and quietly left Edo in the middle of a snowy night. Engakuji Temple is covered with a 3-inch thick layer of snow. Hakuin was sweeping the yard, his back cuffed like a rainbow. But each stroke of the broom was as straight as a sword. Onami knelt down in the middle of the courtyard, her head bowed close to the ground. Teacher, I am a champion wrestler when I train privately, but I just need a look from the audience to dissipate. I tried everything. Drinking wine, chanting mantras, wearing charms. Nothing can save me. Please save me. Hakuin didn't stop brooming. He swept 3 more strokes and then spoke, his voice hoarse with old age. What's your name? Onami. Big waves? Yes. Hakuin laughed, and the laughter echoed in the snowy field. Ha ha ha, nice name. And yet you're afraid of a few pairs of ordinary people's eyes? He stopped sweeping, propped the broom on his shoulder, and looked directly at Onami. You stay here tonight. Don't meditate. Don't recite sutras. Don't pray. Do only one thing. Become big waves. You're no longer a wrestler. You are the Pacific. You are the storm. You are water, no shape, no general, no fear of anyone looking at you. After speaking, he turned his back and continued to sweep the snow as if he had just chased away a fly. Onami is led into the old meditation hall. The door is closed. There was only a small candle and a torn mat. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow hit the window like tens of thousands of invisible hands. He sat down, trying to become a wave. But his mind was full of the audience's laughter, full of images of himself falling on his back, full of humiliation for the past 3 years. He punched his thigh until he was covered in blood, screaming in silence, "What should I do?" Rat time. Ox hour. Now gradually. His head was burning. His eyes lit up. He thought he was going crazy. Then suddenly, there was a very soft pop, like a drop of water falling into a lake. Onami heard nothing anymore. No wind, no snow, no heartbeat. There is only a vast void left, and in that gap, he heard the sound of waves. The first is a small whisper. Then it grew up. Then it roared like 1,000 galloping horses. He found himself no longer sitting in the meditation hall. You are the ocean. You are water. He rolled, he roared, he devoured the whole heaven and earth. You have no shape, no limits, no enemies. There is only endless power, only absolute freedom. The waves crashed against the rocky shore, smashing them into 1,000 pieces. The waves receded, carrying the whole mountain. The waves came again, and nothing could stop them. Onami laughed. Laughter echoed throughout the meditation hall, shaking the snow-covered windows. You're no longer Onami. You are ocean. Dawn. Hakuin pushed the door and walked in. On his face was a rare smile. Onami was still sitting there, but no longer human. His whole body exuded an aura that made Hakuin take a step back. Now let's go, Hakuin said. Today there is the biggest tournament in Edo. Go and show the world what the great waves are. Onami stood up. He didn't go. He drifts. Every step is like a wave. The snow under his feet melted into streams. Winter tournament in Ryogoku. 10,000 people crowded. The sound of drums rushed. The smoke of cigarettes was hazy. Onami walked into the ring, dressed in black, with a white belt, and his eyes partially closed. The first opponent was the Kyushu champion, weighing 2.5 weights and 2 meters tall. He roared, rushing forward like a mad buffalo. Onami didn't open his eyes. He just leaned slightly. A very faint pop. The giant flew out of the ring, fell into the audience seats, and broke 3 pillars. The whole ring was silent. The second, third, fourth matches, Onami didn't hit. He just stood there. Every time his opponent rushed forward, he just tilted slightly, rotated slightly, lifted his hands slightly, like a wave crashing against the shore. No one could touch him. No one knows what he did, only to see the 10 strongest wrestlers in Japan flying out one after another like dry leaves in a storm. Finals. The opponent is Raiden, his old teacher, who was once lifted by him on the training ground. Raiden looked at him, his eyes reddened. Onami, I've done it. Onami opened her eyes. For the first time in the day, he looked directly at the teacher. In those eyes, it is no longer human. It is the deep ocean. It is stormy. It is freedom. Raiden rushed forward. Onami does not move. Only when his hand was about to touch his shirt did he say softly, his voice like the sound of waves lapping, "Teacher, I'm sorry." A light wave of the hand is like caressing the surface of the sea. Raiden flew 3 meters into the air, fell as gently as a leaf, lying outside the ring, smiling. The whole ring was silent for 3 seconds. Then 10,000 people shouted in unison, "Onami! Onami! Onami!" The sound echoed as far as Yokohama, as far as the black ships that were anchored. But Onami didn't hear. He has returned to the ocean. You're not here anymore. 3 days later, Onami returned to Engakuji. He knelt in front of Hakuin, bowing his head close to the ground. Didn't say anything. He had only a gold championship belt on his hand, weighing 10 pounds. Hakuin took the belt and threw it directly into the fireplace. The gold is melted, bright red. "You still don't understand," he said. "This belt is also just a wave. Waves come and go. You are the ocean. Don't hold the waves." Onami raised her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I see, sir. From now on, I will no longer fight. I will go back to the village, open a small training ground, teach children to be human." Hakuin laughed, the first time he laughed so loudly. "Very well, the ocean now knows how to flow back to the river." 10 years later, in a small coastal village of Shizuoka, there was an old, white-haired sumo master who was still teaching children every day. No one knew he was once the legendary Onami. Only one afternoon, when the sun sets, he stands on the beach, his arms outstretched, letting the waves lap against his chest. The children asked, "What are you doing?" He laughed, his voice as warm as the waves lapping. "I'm hugging the ocean, and the ocean is holding you." Inhale deeply, then exhale very slowly. Feel the breath passing through your body like a stream of cool water that is washing away any remaining thoughts in your mind. No effort, no control. Simply relax and be present. At this moment, the outside world fades away, and only you and the silence that surrounds you. In that space, there may still be a fire somewhere, the flame of passion, of the desire to live authentically, of the things we have tried to hide in order to be safe. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about that fire, a story about a girl named Shunkai who dared to live with her own fire, even at the cost of everything. Back then, in the mountains of northern Kyoto, where fog covered the trail and the sound of temple bells rang through the valley, there was an ancient temple called Ryusen, Dragon Spring. That temple has existed for 500 years, is a place where Zen masters are hermited, and also a place where people come to learn how to let go and find peace. One spring morning, when the cherry blossoms were blooming in the sky, a young girl came to the temple gate. Her name is Shunkai. On her shoulder was only a small cloth bag, and in her eyes was the light of those who had seen the deeper things in this world. the light of search. She knelt down, her head touching the ground, and said to the abbot, "I'm not looking for a place to hide. I'm looking for a place to understand. Please let me stay, whether it's just to sweep the yard or hear the bell every morning." Her voice silenced the old abbot. He let her stay, at first just to cook rice, carry water, and sweep the yard. But then he realized that Shunkai was like no one else. She has a soul so intense that it makes others shy. When night fell, the lights in the temple were extinguished, and Shunkai was still sitting alone on the veranda, silent in meditation. She listened to the sound of the wind passing through the bamboo groves, the sound of the leaves touching each other softly, and felt the breathing of heaven and earth as her own. In those moments, she dissolves. No longer a little girl in a finite body, but one with the wind, with the moon, with the universe. But the world is always afraid of fiery souls. In a place where peace is celebrated as a symbol, people are afraid of anyone who dares to burn brightly. Rumors began to appear. It is said that Shunkai had a secret affair with a monk. Some people whispered that she was not really practicing, that she used meditation as a way to seduce. Rumors spread like smoke. Admiration gradually turns into wariness, then alienation. One afternoon, the abbot called her up. He looked at her for a long time and said, "You have a bright mind, but the fire in you is too strong. I'm afraid it will burn them all. Please leave here." Shunkai bowed her head, silent. Not a single tear was shed, but in her heart, a mountain collapsed. That night, she left the temple in silence, carrying only a coarse cloth robe and a broken heart. She walked through the temple gate, looking back for the last time. The moonlight shone down on the cold stone steps, where she used to sweep the leaves, where she had heard the sound of the murmur in the early morning. Everything seemed to be the same, except that she no longer belonged to that place. At night, the wind blew strongly through the pine groves. In her heart, shame and pain swirled like a knife. But beneath that storm of emotions, something else is brewing. Not hatred, but a desire to see the truth to the end. She whispered, "If they're afraid of fire, then I'll show them what fire really is." It is said that near midnight, Shunkai returned. She held a torch in her hand. The trembling light of the fire illuminated her face, not angry, not frantic, but strangely calm. She walked slowly through the temple courtyard. Every step is like a bell ringing in the heart of the night. She placed the torch on the old wooden pillar of the main hall. In an instant, the fire burst forth, burning yellow, then red, then blue. The flames climbed to the roof, crawled over ancient wooden pillars, licking each statue. The entire Ryusen temple lit up in the middle of the night, like a giant dragon waking up. The villagers rushed over, screaming, but Shunkai just stood still, watching the flames consume the place that had once been his home. In her eyes, there was no hatred. There was only a kind of silent light, as if she was seeing the ultimate truth of all that humans were trying to construct to hide their fears. The next morning, the 500-year-old pagoda was reduced to ashes. Shunkai was captured, imprisoned in a small room, where light only passed through the doorway. But in that darkness, she found something that years of meditation had never touched: absolute stillness. During her 7 years in prison, she wrote. Thin pieces of paper were filled with words, lines of meditation on life, about compassion, about loneliness, and the desire to really live. "Why do humans worship light but fear fire?" she wrote. "Why do they talk about compassion but are afraid of those who are true to their hearts?" These pages were later found and reprinted in a small volume entitled Memoirs of Shunkai. The whole village cried as they read. They realized that she is not a heartless rebel, but a soul misunderstood by the world. The temple may have burned, but in the ashes, another fire was born, the flame of freedom. Shunkai died in prison at the age of 30. It is said that when she died, her face seemed to be smiling, peaceful, as if she had finally returned. The fire of the Shunkai did not just burn down a temple, it burns the layers of fear, prejudices, illusions of purity that people build up to hide from themselves. That fire became a symbol of courage, daring to live real, daring to look directly into the darkness within oneself, daring to touch the most bare truth of human life. If we put out the fire, we may survive, but we will never really live. As you sit in silence, as you feel the breath slowly passing through your body, ask yourself, where is the fire within me? Am I letting it burn, or have I hidden it in order to be loved, to be accepted, to be called peace? Meditation is not a cold silence, but a state of complete awareness, where we dare to embrace both the light and the fire within us. Shunkai understood that. She did not choose the safe path. She chose the truth. And in that truth, she finds a freedom that rarely anyone in the world has. Take a deep breath. Exhale very slowly. Let the story of Shunkai melt into your breath, like smoke after a fire. The temple is on fire, but the light is still there, in this very quiet place, in the gentle fire that is burning within you. 10 years after Onami became an ocean, a young man named Kenzaburo, one of the children he once held on Shizuoka Beach, decided to set out to find the last secret of happiness. He had heard Onami tell the story of the shepherd on the Tibetan plateau. With one sentence, the whole caravan of 10 days on the road forgot the cold, the hunger, and the death that lurked behind every Snowden. Kenzaburo left his wrestler shirt, left behind his wooden sword, carrying only a fleece cloak and a single question in his heart. How can I live without arguing with life anymore? He crossed the sea, crossed the desert, crossed the Hindu Kush mountains. That winter, when the snow was so heavy that the camels were kneeling, that he saw the first kitchen smoke on the Changthang Plateau. Story: the nameless shepherd. The sky was so blue that it hurt my eyes. The sheep were as white as clouds falling to the ground. In the middle of the steppe, without a shadow of a tree, an old man sits on a rock that has been worn out by centuries of horse buttocks and human buttocks. He wore a torn sheepskin robe, a yak fur hat on his head, and a bronze-covered headstick in his hand. His face was dark, but his eyes were as bright as two lost stars. Kenzaburo knelt down and folded his hands. "Sir, I came from faraway Japan just to ask one question. How can I live with peace of mind?" The old man didn't answer right away. He pulled out a small knife, cut a piece of dried lamb, chewed it slowly, and then looked up at the sky. At that time, dark clouds were coming from the north, the wind was whistling, and the snow began to fall. Kenzaburo was impatient. "Grandpa, what's the weather like today?" The old man smiled, his white teeth gleaming between his sunburned face. "I like the weather." Kenzaburo was dumbfounded. The old man pointed to the sky that was turning lead. 50 years ago, I, like you, kept asking the heavens, is it sunny or rainy today? Is it windy or stormy today? Is there grass for sheep today? Then one day, I was stuck in a snowstorm for 3 days and 3 nights, and most of the sheep died, and I was almost dead. In that skin-cutting cold, I suddenly understood. Heaven never asks what the weather is like. So why do I keep arguing with the heavens? He paused, grabbed a snowflake that fell on his palm with his hand. The snowflakes disappeared in the blink of an eye. I decided, from now on, whatever weather allows, I like it. The sun likes the sun. When it rains, it likes to rain. Blizzards like blizzards. For I can't change the heavens, but I can change my heart. Kenzaburo listened to it, and his heart felt like someone was squeezing it. He remembered the days in the ring, remembered the nights of crying because of the defeat, remembered how many times he blamed fate. The old man continued, his voice as deep as the sound of prison and the morning. "Do you know why my sheep are always the fattest in the plateau? Because they don't know how to quarrel with grass. When it comes to hay, they eat hay. When it comes to green grass, they eat green grass. They don't stand there and say, I want spring grass. They just eat and then they grow." The wind was getting stronger and stronger. It was snowing heavily. The old man got up, dusted his clothes, and called to the sheep with a long whistle. The sheep immediately gathered. None of them slowed down, even though the wind was cutting the meat. Kenzaburo trembled in his thin robe. He continued to ask, "But what if the storm is big and all the sheep die?" The old man laughed loudly, and the laughter echoed throughout the steppe. "If you die, you will die. I cried one day, and then went to get a new sheep. And if I sit there resenting the heavens and the earth, and the whole flock of stupid sheep, then I die before the sheep." He patted Kenzaburo on the shoulder. "Humans are different from sheep in that sheep eat when they are hungry, and when they are cold, they squeeze together. And people who know how to be hungry sit and complain, 'Why am I hungry?' And when they know how to be cold, they sit and complain, 'Why it's cold?' Forever lamented, forgot to eat, forgot heating, and then died." The snow had covered Kenzaburo's shoulders with white. He felt cold to the bone, but it was strangely warm in his heart. The old man led him into the nomadic tent. Inside, the embers were blazing, and the smell of yak milk was fragrant. He poured him a bowl of hot butter tea. "Drink it. Hot tea prefers hot tea. If the tea is cold, prefer cold tea. Don't sit there thinking, 'If only the tea was always hot.'" Kenzaburo held the tea bowl, tears falling down and blending into the tea. He remembered Onami saying, "The ocean doesn't quarrel with the wind. Whichever direction the wind blows, the waves in that direction." The old man looked at him. His eyes were gentle. "I've come a long way to hear a simple sentence. Don't argue with reality. Like it, or at least don't hate it, because hate doesn't change anything. It just makes my heart cut more." That night, Kenzaburo slept in the old man's tent. The wind was whistling outside. The snow was falling heavily, but he slept best in his life. No dreams, no worries, no questions in my head. Epilogue. Return seeds. The following spring, Kenzaburo returned to Shizuoka. He is no longer the skinny guy he used to be. His eyes were bright, his shoulders were broad, and his smile was as warm as the May sunshine. He turned to Mr. Onami, now almost 80, still standing on the beach hugging the waves. "Teacher," he knelt down, "I have found the last secret." Onami laughed. "Say it." Kenzaburo recounts the story of the shepherd. Onami finished listening, laughing until she burst into tears. "That's enough. The ocean meets the steppe, the waves meet the wind, and finally we point to one place. Don't quarrel with life." Since then, on Shizuoka Beach, there is one more person standing hugging the waves every way. Two teachers and students, one old and one young, were seen stretching out their hands to let the wind blow through, letting the waves lap their chests, their mouths always smiling. A child asked, "How is the weather today, teacher?" Kenzaburo replied, his voice echoing like waves, "We like the weather." "Because we've learned to like whatever weather God allows." Waves crash, the wind blows, and the two men stood there, no longer arguing with Shep's life. In the 12th year after Kenzaburo's return from the Tibetan plateau, one cool autumn afternoon, Onami's teachers and students were standing hugging the waves as usual when they saw a small sailing ship dock. On the bow of the ship, an old man with white hair. His back was cuffed like a broken bow. His hand was propped up with an ivory stick, and his bright eyes were staring directly at the two people. Kenzaburo recognized it immediately. It was Japan's most famous sculptor of the time, the man who had carved only one Buddha statue in his entire life but never finished it, the old man Hishikawa Jirozaemon, who had spent 40 years diving around the world in search of the perfect stone. Jirozaemon stepped down. No greeting, no introduction, just a dry sentence. "I heard that there are people here who know all weather. I want to learn." Onami laughed. "It's easy to like the weather, but have you liked yourself?" Jirozaemon was silent. His eyes were deep, full of quarries, ships, sleepless nights, and an obsession that lasted 40 years. Story. The Man Who Seeks the Buddha Stone. Jirozaemon was born in the fishing village of Ishikawa, where only gray honeycomb rocks are available. From the age of 16, he heard the monks tell about the white marble Buddha statue at Todaiji Temple, which was 15 meters tall and so bright that it could be seen in the mirror. He vowed that one day he would sculpt a statue that was even more beautiful, brighter, and would bring the whole world to its knees. At the age of 20, he left the village carrying a chisel, a hammer, and a dream bigger than Mount Fuji. In his first year, he went to Carrara, Italy. Michelangelo used to get stones here. He climbed to the highest quarry, choosing a block of pure white marble without a single crack. But when he chiseled it, he found that there was a blue streak inside. He quit. In the 5th year, he went to Greece, the island of Paros. The rocks here are as transparent as water. He hired 20 workers to pull him down the mountain, but when he reached the harbor, he found a tiny crack running along the rock body. He was smashed and cried for 3 days. In the 10th year, he went to Egypt, taking pink marble from Aswan. The stone was so beautiful that the Queen of England also ordered it. But when the ship arrived in Yokohama, it was hit by a storm and the rocks broke in half. He jumped into the sea to commit suicide, but was rescued by fishermen. And so on, 40 years. He traveled all over 5 continents, lost all his inheritance, lost 2 fingers to the cold in Russia, lost an eye to the dust in India, lost his fiancée because she couldn't wait. He was old, his hair gray, but the dream was still intact. A perfect block of marble, spotless, to carve the only Buddha statue of his life. When he was 72 years old, he heard that in Kyoto there was a Zen master Bankei who was preaching on Buddha in the mind. He sneered, "What do you need for a Buddha in your heart?" But he went anyway, because he had run out of money, all his strength, and all his hope. A small temple on the outskirts of Kyoto, with mossy tile roofs and a courtyard full of gold leaves. Bankei sat on the podium, holding a fan in his hand, his eyes widened. Jirozaemon knelt down, his voice hoarse. "Master Bai, I have searched for 40 years and have not found the perfect stone to carve the Buddha. Please show me a place, even if it's just one last time." Bankei didn't open her eyes. He pointed to the corner of the courtyard where there was an ancient well covered with green moss. "Look down there." Jirozaemon was disappointed. He thought it would be a secret quarry in Tibet or a cave in China. But he still walked out to the well with a cane. Deep well smoking. The water was inky black. The afternoon sun shone obliquely through the mouth of the well, shining down on the calm water. Jirozaemon bowed. He saw an old man with gray hair, a face full of wrinkles, a blurred eye, trembling hands, and lips dry and cracked with thirst. He saw himself. It was the first time in 40 years that he really looked at himself. He saw a man who had traveled all over the world in search of the Buddha, but had never looked at the person who was looking for him. He saw a man who had smashed thousands of blocks of stone because they were imperfect, but never realized that he was the only stone that needed to be carved. His tears fell into the well, making the water surface ripple. The image of the old man disappeared, then reappeared, then disappeared again. Bankei walked over and put her hand on his shoulder. "See? The Buddha was not in Carrara, not in Paros, not in Aswan. The Buddha has been looking at you from this mirror for 40 years. Jirozaemon fell to his knees, hugged the wall of the well, and cried like a child. He cried for 40 years of running away from himself. He cried because he had missed so many springs, so many handshakes, so many smiles of his fiancée. He cried because he finally understood that the most perfect stone was his broken heart." Epilogue. The statue does not need to be chiseled. 3 months later, Jirozaemon was seen returning to the fishing village of Ishikawa. He didn't bring any marble with him. He only brought a small chisel and an old hammer. He chose a gray honeycomb rock on the beach of his hometown, a rock that he used to criticize as ordinary stone. He sat there from morning to night, chiseling gently, not in a hurry, without perfectionism. A year later, the statue was completed. Not white marble, not 15 meters tall. It was just a seated Buddha, less than a meter high, made of gray honeycomb stone, full of natural cracks. But strangely, when the sun rises, the light shines through the cracks, and the statue shines brightly as if it is made of gold. When it rains, water flows through the crevices of the rocks, and the statue seems to be smiling. When night falls, the moon shines into the stone eyes, and people feel like there are tears. Villagers flocked to watch. They knelt down, not because of the beautiful stone, but because they saw themselves in the statue, full of scars, full of flaws, but still shining when the light passed through. Jirozaemon lived another 10 years. He was not going anywhere. Every morning he sat by the statue, his hands stroking the cracks, his mouth muttering, "The Buddha has been here since the beginning. I just need to stop running." The day he died, the villagers buried him right next to the statue. On the grave without a headstone, only a small inscription is engraved. "The most perfect stone is the heart that has ever been broken." And from then on, every time someone asks, "Where is the Buddha?" villagers don't just go to the temple, they led him to the beach, pointing to the water at high tide. "Look, the Buddha is looking at you in the mirror." Honeycomb stone statue to the Destiny Waterfall. 3 years after Jirozaemon's death, in the spring of 1881, a young man named Tetsuya, Jirozaemon is called his great-grandfather, left the fishing village of Ishikawa, carrying a tiny piece of stone from the statue of the honeycomb Buddha. He had heard that in Nagano Prefecture, there was an old man who had survived a fall from Japan's tallest waterfall, and that the old man was teaching people to become water. Tetsuya thought, if his great-grandfather had found the Buddha in the mirror, then he wanted to find life in the flow. He traveled for 17 days, crossing passes, crossing forests, and finally reaching the Kiso Valley. The Kiso River roared between two steep cliffs, and on top of it was Shiraito Falls, which was more than 100 meters high, and the water was as white as a silk ribbon torn by the sky. Old man and waterfall, become water. At the foot of the waterfall, an old man of about 80 years old was sitting fishing with his bare hands. His back was cuffed like a rainbow, his white hair fluttering in the wind, but his hands were as strong as ropes. He was called Mizuoji, the old man. Tetsuya knelt down. "Uncle, I heard that you once fell from the top of this waterfall and still lived. Please teach me how to survive when life throws me to death." Mizuoji didn't look at him, just smiled, and then suddenly stood up, took off his shirt, and jumped into the whirlpool at the foot of the waterfall. Tetsuya panicked and rushed after him, only to see the old man disappear in the white foam. 3 minutes later, the old man emerged from the river 100 meters away, still holding a carp as big as his thigh, laughing. "Come down here, child! The water is not cold!" Tetsuya trembled and jumped down. The cold water pierced the bones. The current was so strong that he was swept away like a leaf. He panicked and smashed his limbs, drank his fill, and was about to sink when Mizuoji's strong hand grabbed him by the collar and pulled him up to a rock in the middle of the stream. "Listen," the old man said, the water still flowing from his beard. 30 years ago, I, like you, resisted the water. I was swept down from the top of the waterfall. I punch, I kick, I scream, I curse. Result? Broke 3 ribs, lost half of his ear, and almost died. But when we are exhausted, we have no more resistance. We let go. I let the water roll. I let the water swirl. I let the water throw it. And strangely enough, the water doesn't kill me. Water hugs me. The water pushes me ashore like a child. The old man took Tetsuya's hand and placed it on the surface of the swirling water. The water has no intention of killing anyone. Water only does the work of water, flowing. He died not for the water, but for resisting the water. Tetsuya trembled. But what if life throws you to death? Mizuoji laughed loudly, and the laughter echoed over the waterfall. Life is this waterfall. He didn't ask me what I wanted. He just asked, "Do you dare to become water?" When you lose your job, become a country. When the lover leaves, it becomes water. When sickness strikes, become water. Flow with it, bend yourself with it, let it take you, and then you will see the shore at the end of the stream. The old man pulled Tetsuya into the vortex again. This time, he didn't resist. He relaxed. He let the water roll, let the water swirl, let the water throw. And miraculously, he drifted through rocky rapids, over small waterfalls, even through places where the villagers said no one survived, and then gently went to the shore half a mile away, his whole body soaked but without a scratch. Mizuoji stood on the shore, stretching out his hand. See? Flowing with the flow of life, surviving the best. Hakuin and the baby. Is that so? 3 months later, Tetsuya left the Kiso Valley, taking with him a piece of honeycomb stone and a heart that had learned to become water. He headed west to the small village of Unzen in Kyushu, where Japan's most famous Zen master at the time, the reincarnated Hakuin Ekaku, who was said to have reached the realm of having nothing to lose. The small temple is located in the middle of a rice field. The tiled roof is covered with green moss, and in front of the courtyard is an old cherry tree that is dying. Hakuin was sitting under a tree, holding a child of about 2 years old in his hand, and sang a lullaby in a hoarse voice. "Oh, oil wallets, don't cry anymore. The monk gave milk." Tetsuya was surprised. A famous Zen master carrying a child? He knelt down. "Master, I came from Nagano. Please teach me how to keep peace when the whole world turns its back." Hakuin didn't look at him, just continued to shake the baby. "I'm 3 years late. I'm busy." Tetsuya was surprised. He told the story of the old man in the waterfall, the story of the honeycomb stone statue, but Hakuin just said, "Yes, yes," and continued to sing lullabies. For 3 days, Tetsuya knelt outside the gate. On the 4th day, the whole village was in an uproar. A young girl named Hana, the richest child in the village, has just given birth to a child without a husband. She pointed at Hakuin. The baby is the son of the Zen master. The whole village was boiling. People spat on the temple grounds, threw stones at the tiled roofs, and cursed Hakuin as a demon in the guise of a monk. The district official came, demanding to arrest him. The villagers demanded that the pagoda be burned. Hakuin just looked at them all and then said a single sentence. "Is that so?" They threw the baby into his arms. Hakuin took it gently. "Is that so?" Since then, Hakuin has become a reluctant father. He carried the children to beg for milk from house to house. When the house was closed, he stood outside singing lullabies until they opened. He replaced the diaper with old sutra paper. He lulled his children to sleep with the Bhagna verse. He walked around the village. Whoever cursed him laughed. Whoever spat at him bowed his head. 2 years passed. The baby grew up, calling him Daddy. Hakuin calls it the little Buddha. One afternoon, Hana ran to the temple, fell to her knees and sobbed. "Master, I lied. The child's father is a neighbor, not a teacher. I was afraid that my parents would beat me to death, so I blamed them. I can't stand it anymore. Please forgive me." The district official came. The villagers came, pulling together to apologize loudly. They knelt in front of the temple yard, crying, and demanded to take the baby home. Hakuin was holding the little Buddha, gently put him down and said, "Is that so?" No resentment, no blame. There is not a word, "I told you." Just, "Is that so?" And then turned around, continuing to sweep the yard as if nothing had happened. Tetsuya knelt there, tears falling down the mat. He understood. The old man of the waterfall taught him to become water in order to survive. Hakuin teaches him that's it to live without surviving. On the last day, Tetsuya knelt down in front of Hakuin. "Master Bai, I understand, but please give me a sentence to take home." Hakuin looked out at the golden rice fields, looked up at the cherry trees that had fallen all their flowers, looked down at the little Buddha who was learning to walk, and then said, in a voice as soft as the wind, "Life doesn't ask you what you want. It just asks, are you ready to love what's happening?" Tetsuya bowed his head, taking it as if he had received a waterfall, a slander, a beehive stone statue, a drop of milk, and 2 years of crying. He stood up, carrying nothing but a small stone and a heart that had ceased to argue. On the way back, he passed Shiraido Falls. He jumped into the whirlpool, let the water roll, let the water throw, let the water hug. He drifted through the rapids, through the pine forests, through the places where they say, no one can survive, and then went to the shore laughing. Is that so? Since then, in the fishing village of Ishikawa, it has been said that there is a young man who stands on the beach every morning, holding the waves with his arms outstretched, his mouth always smiling. When someone asks, "What's the weather like today?" he replied, "I like the weather. Because I was ready to love what was happening." Waves crash, the wind blows, and Tetsuya stood there, becoming water, becoming becoming unconditional love for this very life. Let's continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the story of the thief and the Zen master. On a quiet evening, when the sunset adorns the sky with purples and golds, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sits in his simple home, chanting ancient chants. Under the silent moonlight, Shichiri Kojun's small temple is located deep in the middle of the village, like a tranquil island in the midst of the turbulent sea of life. That night, the wind blew through the bamboo rows behind the garden, and the rustling of leaves was like a whisper of impermanence. In the small wooden room, a creeping oil lamp cast a pale yellow light on the Zen master's calm face. He was sitting in meditation, his breathing steadily, as if in harmony with the breath of heaven and earth. Everything is static. Only the sound of insects in the distance and the sound of the night wind gently shaking the door. But it was in that moment of peace that the door opened and a burst of cold air hit. A man walked in, his eyes panicked, and his breathing was heavy. In his hand was a shining sword, reflecting the light like a silver snake crawling through the room. "Give me the money!" he grumbled, his hands trembling but his eyes fierce. He was not a born evildoer. A life of pushing, poverty, resentment, and fear had turned him into a person he didn't even realize. Shichiri opened his eyes gentle but as deep as a calm lake. There was no fear, not a ripple of worry. He looked at the robber as if he were looking at a lost visitor. "Money?" His voice was as soft as the wind. "In the drawer over there, you can take it. But remember not to take it all. I need to leave some to pay taxes." The thief was stunned. In his mind, no one had ever reacted like this. Everyone was scared, screaming for help, fleeing or resisting. But the person in front of him was the opposite, as calm as if he were receiving a friend to visit. He hesitated for a moment, and then walked over to the drawer. His hands were still shaking. He opened it and saw a few glittering coins. He put it in his pocket, his heart full of contradictions. As he was crouching, the Zen master's calm voice rang out again. "I've received the money, so I have to say thank you." The thief was startled, stammering, "Thank you." And then, like a hypnotized man, he turned and fled into the night. The door closed, the lamp was still burning, and the wind returned to the old rustling sound. The Zen master gently closed his eyes, returning to his breath as if nothing had happened. A few weeks later, rumors spread throughout the region. The thief had been arrested. He has long been wanted for many other thefts. This time, he couldn't escape. When he was taken to court, the list of people robbed by him was the Zen master Shichiri Kojun. On the day of the trial, the Zen master was invited to testify. The whole court was waiting for him to recount the incident to increase the crime of the thief. But when asked, the Zen master just smiled, his eyes still shining with gentleness. "No, Mr. Judge, he didn't rob me. I gave him the money, and he thanked me." The whole room was silent. The judge looked at the Zen master and then at the robber. The thief lowered his face, his shoulders trembling. He couldn't believe it. The man he had pointed his sword at in the middle of the night was standing up for him. For the first time in his life, he felt his heart soften. He burst into tears. Tears flowed not out of fear, but out of shame for being forgiven, for touching a love he had never known. After the trial, he went to see the Zen master. Kneeling down, he said in a hiccup, "Sir, why? Why don't you denounce me? I pointed my sword at you. I deserve to die." The Zen master smiled and replied as lightly as his breath, "If I denounce you, you will be punished, but your heart will still suffer. If I forgive you, maybe you will understand what compassion is. I don't want to see another person imprisoned, whether in prison or in my own hatred." The thief looked up, his eyes red. In that moment, he saw something he had never seen in his life, a man who had no fear, no hatred, only love as pure as the moonlight shining on the surface of the lake. From that day on, he was no longer a thief. He stayed at the temple and asked to be a disciple of the Zen master. Life at the temple is simple but full of peace. Every morning, the pagoda bell rings like the breath of heaven and earth. Shichiri used to get up early to sweep the yard, water the plants, and cook rice with his disciples. The new disciple, who had been a thief, began to learn again from the smallest things. Mindfulness in every breath, every step, every bell. In the early days, he was still not used to it. When he heard the birds singing, he felt his heart rest. When the wind blew, he remembered the past. Once, during a zazen session, he couldn't stand it and asked, "Master, I can't stop the thoughts in my head. I remember the sin. I remember the fear. I remember what I did." The Zen master looked at him kindly. "You don't need to stop them. Just look. It's like watching the clouds drift through the sky. Don't cling. Don't chase. Just see. When you see clearly, they will dissolve." From there, he began to practice sighting. Every time a memory arises, he just breathes and looks. Day by day, the waves in my heart gradually subsided. He began to feel the stillness that his teacher always had. The stillness not because there were no waves, but because he understood the nature of waves as water. One afternoon, when the two teachers and students were sweeping the leaves in the yard, the Zen master said, "Do you know why I wasn't afraid when I held my sword that day?" He shook his head. "Because I see that you're not a bad person. I was only overshadowed by fear and hunger. When we see that clearly, we are no longer afraid of you. I only see a human being in pain, and I just need to love." The thief bowed his head, tears falling on the ground. He understood that what makes a great Zen master is not in wisdom or divine power, but in unconditional compassion. Love that does not choose an object, does not demand a response, is not afraid of being hurt. Many years later, he became a true meditator. Everyone in the area knows the strange story of the forgiven thief. He was no longer the darkness, but became a light for many other misguided people. One day, a young man came to the temple. He had just been released from prison. His eyes were full of anger and guilt. He asked, "It is said that there is a Zen master here who once saved a thief. Is he still alive?" The disciple smiled. "My teacher has passed away, but I was a thief in the past." The young man was surprised, looking at the man in front of him. A gentle face, a calm smile. He told him his own story about a moonlit night, about the sword, about the two words "thank you," about the trial and his compassion. After listening, the young man burst into tears. He put down his sword and bowed. "Please teach me." The disciple put his hand on his shoulder and said softly, "My teacher once said, responding to violence with violence only sows more suffering. Only unconditional love can end that vicious cycle. You don't have to be anyone else. Just go back to being yourself, the inherently clear, gentle heart." The story of Shichiri Kojun and the thief has been passed down forever. People tell it not only as a moral anecdote, but as a mirror that reflects on their own souls. Because in every person there is a thief, the part of the mind that is insecure, afraid, greedy, and wants to appropriate. And there is also a Zen master, the bright mind, loving and forgiving. When the light part sees the dark part without hating, when we can smile at our own mistakes, that is the moment of transformation. That night, in the stillness of the moonlight, a sword that had once trembled with fear had become a symbol of awakening. The small temple where Shichiri used to meditate still rings the bell every morning. The bell was like a reminder. There is no enemy other than the heart that does not understand. No prison is cramped enough to be filled with resentment, and there is no greater freedom than the freedom of one who loves what has hurt him. That is the power of unconditional love, the power that does not need to win over anyone, but only to understand and embrace all. Because in the end, as the Zen master once said, only love is strong enough to dissolve violence. When you look at the enemy with your eyes, he will no longer be an enemy. And so, that story, in the middle of the moonlit night, between the sword wielder and the smiling man, is still there as a reminder to the world. The robber can take away wealth, but not the peace of the one who has let go of all fear. Violence can shake the body, but only love awakens the heart. And when that heart wakes up, the world around it begins to change. From dark night to dawn. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not end with hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of confronting violence with absolute peace. Respond to receiving a gift and respond to fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that power must be met by force? That aggression requires a defensive response. In the 14th year of the Tang dynasty, autumn golden leaves fell to fill the Taichi palace. Emperor Tang Xuantong, who built more than 300 temples, hand-copied more than 10,000 sutras, and raised thousands of monks, sat on a throne carved with dragons, his heart still as empty as his vast palace. He had heard rumors about a Zen master named Wu Tian in Chungnam Mountain. They say he doesn't preach sutras, he doesn't do blessings, he doesn't have a temple, he just sits under an old pine tree, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent. Some people say he's crazy. Some people say that he became a Buddha in the womb. Huiyantong sent the eunuch to bring the golden thread to the foot of the mountain. I want to know the highest truth of Buddhism. 3 days later, invite the Grand Master to the palace. 3 days later, an old man in patchwork, barefoot, holding a bamboo stick, walked over 1,000 steps. He didn't kneel. He didn't say his name. He just stood in the middle of the hall, looking directly into the emperor's eyes. The Taichi palace was silent. 3,000 female courtiers, 500 martial officials, 24 eunuchs and guards. No one dared to breathe hard. Xuantong spoke up, his voice sounding like a bronze bell. Venerable master, I have read all the 12 sets of the Tripitaka, offered more than 1,000 gold offerings, and built a pagoda higher than the mountain. Today, I only ask one question. What is the highest truth of the holy Buddhist teachings? The whole court waited with bated breath for a 4-verse verse, or a profound canon, or at least a classic applause. Wu Qian looked around the great hall, the winding golden dragon, the ceiling painted with gold lipstick, the jade column inlaid with pearls, and then looked directly into the emperor's eyes and replied softly, "The emptiness is immense, without a trace of holiness." The silence lasted like 1,000 years. Xuantong blinked. He was mentally prepared to hear about the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12 causes and dependences, or at least one sentence, necessarily idealistic creation. But empty? There is no trace of holiness? Is that a denial of his whole life? The emperor smiled wryly, his voice trembling slightly. If there is no holiness, then who are you? Wu Chan smiled, the smile of a child who had just woken up. I don't know. 3 words. Just 3 words. But like 3 hammer blows rang out in the middle of the Taichi palace. I know. Xuantong felt that the throne under his body suddenly turned into a cloud of smoke. Everything he had built, the temple, the merit, the title of protector emperor, suddenly dissolved into dust. He found himself naked in the middle of the great hall. No crown, no dragon cell, only an old man trying to hold on to his own shadow. He got up from his throne, walked down the steps, and knelt down in front of the barefoot old man. Please teach me. How can I be like you? Wuqian lifted the emperor up, gently brushed the dust on the dragon cell, and then said, Your Majesty wants to learn don't know? It's easy. Let go. Let go of what? Let go of all that your Majesty is holding on to. Xuantong looked around. The dragon shaved with Shu heavenly silk? Seal billions with Hoathi bitch jade? 3,000 female courtiers? 10,000 troops? The title of heavenly son? A lifetime of accumulated merit? He trembled. Let go. What do you have left? Wuqian pointed to the ceiling of the hall, where the sunlight shone through the window, forming a bright circle on the stone floor. This is left. The emperor watched. Just a ring of light. He was dumbfounded. A ring of light? Yes. Not an emperor, not a Buddhist, not a good person, not a bad person. It's just a ring of light that appears when the sun shines through the window. When the sun sets, the ring of light disappears. No one owns it. No one loses it. It doesn't need titles. It doesn't need merit. It doesn't need anyone to recognize it. Huayan Tong sat down on the cold stone floor, tears rolling down his 54th autumn dragon face. I've been searching all my life. It turned out to be just a ring of light. Wuqian sat down next to him, and the two of them were like two old men playing chess at the head of the village. Does your Majesty want to try to live like a ring of light for a day? How do you try it? Tomorrow, your Majesty will not be the emperor anymore. Just one person who doesn't know. No one recognizes him. The emperor who once sat on the throne is now just a thin old man walking in the middle of the Eastern market. He saw an old woman selling dumplings being beaten by the guards for not paying enough taxes. In the old days, he would order pardons. Today, he just stood there, watching, not knowing what to do. The old lady looked up, saw an old man with red eyes, and immediately handed him a hot dumpling. Eat it, don't be sad. Huyan Tong held the dumplings, and tears fell on the hot crust of the cake. He eats. For the first time in his life, he ate without anyone kneeling almost to give thanks. In the afternoon, he sat under a banyan tree at the head of the village, watching children play umbrellas to eat quan. A baby fell, crying. He didn't know how to coax him, just sat still. The child restrained himself, climbed on his shoulders, and laughed. He also laughed, not understanding why he was laughing. In the evening, he returned to the palace through the back door. The eunuch was horrified. Where did your Majesty go all day? Huyan Tong looked around the Tai Chi palace. The gold and jade were still shining, the courtesans were still bowing their heads, but he saw it all as a dream. He asked, Are you really the emperor? The eunuch knelt down. Your Majesty is the heavenly sun. Xuantong shook his head. No, it's just a ring of light. 3 years later, Huyan Tong abdicated the throne, giving the throne to the crown prince. He moved to a small camp on Cheongnam Mountain, next to the old pine tree of Wushuan. It is rumored that every morning, 2 old men sit under a pine tree, saying nothing, just watching the clouds drift. One day they laughed out loud. One day they were silent all day. One day, a court messenger came and begged, Your Majesty, the people miss you. Please come back. The old man, who used to be the emperor, looked at the messenger and smiled. Where are you going back? I've never been there. The messenger cried, So who are you? The old man looked up at the blue sky without a single cloud and replied softly, I don't know. The wind blew through, and the pine needles fell all over the shoulders. The messenger looked up. Only the old pine tree remained, and a silent ring of light on the ground. There is no longer an emperor. There are no more Zen masters. There is only immense emptiness, without a trace of holiness. When we realize this emptiness is our true nature, we discover the most ordinary miracle. This moment is exactly as it lacks nothing. Our next story reveals the difference between technical mastery and true self-mastery. This is the lesson of the archer and the bridge. A young man has spent years perfecting his skills with bows and arrows. Mount Hiko, winter in the 12th year of the heavenly treasure. The cold wind cut through the skin, and the snow fell like a thin blade. At the foot of the mountain, it was rumored that there was a young archer named Zi Yun, 19 years old, who had been hitting the flat ground for 3 years. His arrow could pierce two talismans that were an inch apart at a distance of 100 steps. The government hung the gold prize. The martial arts masters came to challenge the battle, and they all lost. His reputation echoed throughout Luoyang, and people called him Ziyun is the best, the world is unparalleled. But Ziyun was not happy. He heard that on the top of Hiko, there was an old man named Xuankong, who used to be a general of the Song dynasty, who abandoned his bows and arrows in old age and went to the mountains to live as a hermit. It is said that he shot an arrow that could cut the wings of a swallow in midair. Ziyun thought, if I can win against him, I will truly be the first in the world. He carried an ivory bow and 100 silver arrows, climbing the mountain alone in the middle of a snowstorm. On the 7th day, he came to the end of the cliff. An old man with white hair and torn clothes was sitting chopping firewood. On the wall hung an old bamboo bough. The bowstring was broken a long time ago. Ziyun knelt down. Senior, I'm confused about coming up from Luoyang. I want to ask for a test once. Xuankong didn't raise his head, just asked, how far can you shoot? 100 steps, piercing the willow. 150 steps? I haven't tried it. The old man stopped splitting firewood and looked directly into Ziyun's eyes for the first time. Follow me. The bridge over the abyss house. They climbed for another 3 hours, reaching a deep ravine with no bottom. Between the two steep cliffs, there was only a round wooden tree with a diameter of less than an arm, more than 100 meters long, covered with snow and ice. Under the abyss, the white clouds rolled like fierce waves. The wind whistled through the rock crevice, enough to blow people away. Huyan Kong walked out of the bridge first, without a protective rope, without looking down, walking lightly like a cat. In the middle, he stopped, took out a small bamboo bow from his sleeve, a bowstring made of human hair. He raised his bow, aimed at a pine tree more than 100 meters away on the opposite cliff, and fired a shot. The arrow flew through the abyss, slamming into the center of the red ring that he had carved beforehand. The wind was still blowing, the bridge was still swaying, but he stood still like a stone statue. He turned and called, "It's your turn." Ziyun looked down at the abyss. The white clouds rolled up like a demon's mouth and swallowed people. His legs trembled. He tried to take a step. The bridge shook violently, and the ice and snow fell slightly. He fell to his knees, hugging the wood tightly, sweat pouring out like a bath, even though it was 10 degrees cold. The ivory bow in his hand weighed like 1,000 pounds. The bowstring trembled, and he could not lift it. Huyan Kong stood there, not laughing, not scolding, just asking one question. Are you afraid of death? Ziyun nodded, and tears fell on the ice. Wow, afraid. Then you've already lost. 3 years under the waterfall, Xuankong didn't chase him away. He held him back and began to teach from the beginning, not to shoot arrows, but to teach the unchanging mind. Every morning, he led him to a waterfall 100 meters high and told him to stand under the bitterly cold waterfall, holding a dry leaf in his hand. Task: keep the leaves from getting wet for an hour. On the first day, the leaves are wet as soon as the water touches them. On the third day, he held on to 10 breaths. On the 30th day, he kept half an hour. In the second year, he was able to stand under the waterfall for a day. The leaves were still dry. Xuankong asked, "How do you do it?" Ziyun replied, "I don't try to hold on to the leaves anymore. I let the water run through. The leaves dry on their own." The old man nodded. That's the first step of the immutable mind. Third year, wooden bridge again. In the winter of the third year, the snow fell heavier than in the past. Xuankong led him to the bridge in the abyss again. The wood is now more rotten. The ice is thicker. The wind is colder. The old man stepped forward and shot an arrow, still hitting the red heart. Then he handed the bow to Ziyun. "It's your turn." Ziyun walked out. "My legs don't tremble anymore." But he didn't raise his bow right away. He stood in the middle of the bridge, looked down into the abyss, and then looked up at the sky. The wind whistled through his ears, and the white clouds swirled under his feet. He smiled. He put down his bow and took out a dry leaf from his sleeve, the one he had kept for 3 years under the waterfall. He put the leaf on the bowstring, raised the bow, and aimed at the pine tree opposite. The arrow flew away, not the silver arrow, but the dried leaf. The leaf flew through the abyss, crossed the wind and snow, and gently landed in the center of the red ring on the pine tree. Xuankong laughed out loud for the first time. "You understand." Ziyun knelt down in the middle of the bridge, tears falling. "Master, I understand. The skill is not to hit the red heart. The skill is that when standing in front of life and death, the mind is still like the surface of a lake without ripples." Last day, Huyen Kong took him back to the painting. He took the old bamboo bow and hung it on the wall and handed it to Ziyun. "I'm old. This bow is yours now." Ziyun took it and saw the bowstring made from the old man's white hair. He asked, "You taught me for 3 years? Just let me shoot a leaf?" Xuankong shook his head. "I taught you for 3 years, so that when one day you stand in front of the arrow of fate, an arrow that can save 1,000 people or kill 1,000, you will still keep an unchanging mind." 10 years later, in the 14th year of Tianbao, the Ho enemy invaded the border. The Tang army lost 3 matches in a row. Emperor Tang Xuantong remembered the rumor of a divine archer on Mount Hiko and sent someone to pick him up. Ziyun, now nearly 30, wore a white robe, carried an old bamboo bow, and went to battle alone. On the high hill, he faced 10,000 enemy troops. The enemy general on a white horse, 500 steps away, laughed. "Put your head out here!" Ziyun raised his bow. A cold wind blew through, flags flew, and war drums rushed. He didn't look at the enemy general. He looked up at the sky. A dry leaf was falling. He put the leaf on the bowstring and let go. The leaf flew over 500 steps, falling lightly on the helmet of the enemy general. The general was stunned, looked at the leaf, and then looked at Ziyun standing on the high hill, not angry, not afraid, just smiling. 10,000 enemy troops were silent. The general knelt down and let go of his sword. "We have lost. The battle ends without bloodshed. Return to the mountain." Ziyun refused all titles and returned to the painting on Mount Hiko. Xuankong had died since the winter of the previous year, leaving only a small grave under the pine tree. He hung a bamboo bow on the wall, next to a dry leaf pressed into a wooden frame. Under the pine tree, he carved an inscription. "Skill is only valuable when the mind is immutable before life and death. I shot a leaf and saved 10,000 people. But I know that leaf will never leave my hand." The wind blew through, and the pine needles fell all over the grave. Under the tree, a ring of light quietly appears on the ground, then dissipates as the sun sets. There are no more archers, no more war. There is only immense emptiness in the unchanging mind. The Zen Master Bank taught, the unborn Buddha mind can handle any situation. This indicates a constant cognitive quality, whether we are shooting at safe targets or standing on a cliff. That is the difference between the confidence that comes from controlling our environment and the confidence that comes from trusting in our ability to react wisely to whatever arises. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 empty words is a word that brings peace." An arrow fired from true presence and inner stability is worth more than 1,000 arrows fired from the ego and carefully controlled conditions. True mastery manifests not in perfect circumstances, but in our ability to maintain our center when everything around us is uncertain. Take a deep look at your own relationship with challenge and fear. Where can you do well in your life in a safe, controlled environment, but struggle when the stakes are raised or conditions become unpredictable? This is not a failure. It's simply information about where your practice needs to dig deep. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and abilities you have developed, can you distinguish between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you feel the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenges and the confidence that comes from facing challenges with presence? The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that chaos is inherent in all things complex. Be diligent in trying. Life is a bridge across the abyss. Uncertainty, sometimes frightening, always requires us to find our balance again. Not in the safety of solid ground, but in our ability to concentrate as we traverse space. True mastery is not about the perfect goal. It's simply information about where your practice needs to dig deep. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and abilities you have developed, can you distinguish between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you feel the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenges and the confidence that comes from facing challenges with presence? The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that chaos is inherent in all things complex. It's about maintaining our balance no matter where we stand. Let us now explore a story of choice, responsibility, and power that we hold in every moment. This is the story of the student and the sparrow. On Tianmu Mountain, in the 11th year of the Tang Dynasty, there was a small painting called Wu Xin Temple. There were only two teachers there. The old monk Huyen Chan, 82 years old, lived a simple and quiet life, not saying more than 3 sentences a day. The other was a 15-year-old boy named Xiao Shi, famous throughout the region for his intelligence and understanding, but also because of that, he was as arrogant as anyone else. For 3 years of studying Zen, he memorized the 6 Ancestors Sutra, was able to preach the Heart Sutra to the whole village, spoke fluently and sharply, making many people praise him as a prodigy. However, no matter how hard he tried, he had never heard the teacher praise a word. The old monk just watched quietly, sometimes just nodding slightly and then being silent, which made him feel extremely uncomfortable. In Xiaoxi's heart, dissatisfaction rose day by day. This monk must be better than me, he thought to himself, just good at making mysterious appearances. One summer morning, while watering in the medicinal garden, Xiaoxi came across a young sparrow falling from the nest. The feathers were still soft, and his heart was pounding in his hands. Looking at the trembling little creature, a mischievous thought flashed in his mind. I'm going to make you lose to me once. He ran into the hall, knelt in front of the teacher, and hid his smile in a defiant voice. Master, the disciple has one last question to test his wisdom. I'm holding a bird in my hand. May I ask, is it alive or dead? He had calculated carefully. If he said live, he would squeeze his hand so that the bird would die immediately. If he said die, he would open his hand and let it fly away. No matter how he answered, he was wrong. He imagined the scene of the old monk being embarrassed, complacent, thinking that he would definitely win this time. Huyen Chan was still sitting flat on the podium, his eyes partially closed. After listening, he opened his eyes. His gaze was as deep as an ancient well. He didn't look at his hand, didn't ask another word, just said 3 words quietly, as light as a breeze. The answer is in your hands. Xiao Shi was stunned. He had prepared hundreds of scenarios, but none of them answered. Sweat was pouring down his forehead, and his hands were shaking slightly. The bird in his hand was still flapping its wings weakly, its small breath touching his skin, as if to remind him that it was alive. The space was suddenly as quiet as a sheet. Xiao Shi felt like time had stopped. In 10 silent breaths, he suddenly saw more clearly than ever. With a gentle squeeze, the bird's bones would break, blood would seep through his fingers, and a life would disappear just because of his pride. If he opens his hand, he will lose the game that he sets himself, but the bird will live. Between those 2 choices, his heart skipped a beat. He looked up at the teacher. Huinchan still sat there, calm as a mountain, not smiling, not angry, not moving. In that silence, Xiaoxi suddenly found himself small, naked, and pitiful. A bit of shame spread through his body, because he was going to use the death of a living being to prove that he was smarter than his teacher. He trembled slightly, and then slowly opened his hand. The little sparrow was stunned for a moment, then flapped its wings and flew to the roof, landed on a peach branch in the yard, chirping as if it had never been imprisoned. Xiaoxi watched, his eyes blurred. He knelt down, tears falling. He cried not because he lost, but because he saw his heart clearly for the first time. Every game of winning and losing, it turns out, is a game of the ego. And that ego is more fragile than the breath of a sparrow. Xuanchen walked over, put his thin, dry hand on his head, and his voice was as light as a cloud. 10 children, I won today. Xiaoxi looked up. His eyes were red. I lost, teacher. I lost in white. He smiled. I have won what I need to win the most, winning myself. I chose to live instead of die, choose to love instead of harm. From now on, every day I live, I will have to choose again. That's the last lesson of Zen. 10 years passed. Xiaoxi was now 25 years old, known as Shi Tue, and was assigned to be the abbot of a small temple at the foot of the mountain. The pagoda is simple, surrounded by peach forests. Every morning, Shi Tue swept the yard, listened to the birds singing on the branches, and his heart was as light as dew. One day, a 15-year-old boy with bright eyes ran in front of him, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Master! The disciple has one last question to test his wisdom. Shi Tue smiled kindly. Tell me, the little uncle said quickly. I am holding a bird in my hand. Tell me, is it alive or dead? Shi Hui looked at the little uncle, as if he saw himself 10 years ago. He looked up at the peach branch. There, a small sparrow was tilting its head to look down. He understood that the lesson of his life had returned. He said softly, The answer is in your hands. The little uncle was stunned. He stood still, sweat rolling down his forehead. Then, very slowly, he opened his hand. The little bird flapped its wings and flew up, landing on the old peach branch, where the mother bird was waiting. Uncle Xiao knelt down, tears flowing. I was going to kill him to win over you. Shi Hui put his hand on the small roll and said softly, I have won. I have chosen to live. Time passed again. 30 years later, Shi Wisdom was 55 years old. His hair is gray, his body is thin, but he still keeps the habit of sweeping the yard every morning. Under the old peach tree, where birds used to fly away, is now where he used to sit and watch the sunset. One autumn afternoon, an old man with a torn shirt and a cane came in front of him. He knelt down, tears flowing down his face. Master, 30 years ago, I was the little uncle who tried to kill birds to win over you. I'm back today, just to say thank you. Shi Hui looked at him and smiled kindly. Do you still remember? Remember, the old man choked up. All my life, whenever I try to do evil, I remember my hand that day. I chose to open my hands, and from then on, every day I chose to open my hand. She too got up and walked out to the temple yard with the old man. On a peach branch, a sparrow is teaching her to fly. Shi Hui said softly, Do you see? The bird in the past gave birth to children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. An open hand in the past saved a whole family of sparrows. The old man knelt down, tears rolling down his wrinkled face. Teacher, I have lived my whole life to repay that hand. Shi Hui helped him up and said quietly, There is no need to repay anyone. Just when you meet another hand clenched, tell them the answer is in their hands. Then one day, autumn returned. Fallen peach leaves filled the yard. Shi too sat under a tree, holding a familiar broom in his hand. The disciple went to look for him and found that he was still sitting still, with a slight smile on his face, and his body was cold. When they shrouded it, opened his hand, and saw a small sparrow feather lying in the palm of his thin hand. They buried him under an old peach tree. On the tombstone there is no engraving, no name, only the inscription, I opened my hand once, and since then I have opened it every day. The autumn wind blew through, and the peach leaves flew over the grave. On the highest branch, a small sparrow chirps, as if telling the story of a hand that once chose to hurt rather than harm, to live rather than die. That story, through many generations of narrators, still trembles closed hearts. Every time someone clenches their hands in anger, in selfishness, in hatred, somewhere in their hearts the old saying will echo, "The answer is in your hands." And then, one by one, it gradually opened again. Hands open. Birds are alive. The hand is open. The heart is light. Hands open. The world is saved. On Tianmu Mountain, every time the wind comes, the old peach branches still vibrate, the sparrows still sing like the laughter of the old Zen master echoes. There is no win or loss, only opening and holding. And opening one's hand, it's opening one's heart mind. Where are you waiting for someone else's answer, solution, or guidance? What would change if you fully realized that the power to shape the outcome was already in your hands? This doesn't mean that you have control over all external circumstances, but you always have a choice about how you react. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Every thought, every intention, every action is like the student's choice with the bird, an opportunity to create life or death, beauty or suffering, wisdom or ignorance. The answer is always in our hands. Tonight, as you examine the various situations in your life where you seek guidance or feel helpless, can you sense the truth that the teacher is pointing out? Can you feel the weight of the choices you carry with you every day? Not a burden, but the basic dignity of conscious existence. As the Buddha observed, no one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one can. We ourselves must walk the path. The bird flies freely, not because of the wisdom of the teacher, but because of the choice of the student. When we recognize our own power to choose life over death, compassion over cruelty, truth over deception, we discover that the answer to every important question is always in our hands. Now let's move on to a story about the courage to trust the flow of life. Beneath the crystal river, where the water is so clear that sunlight penetrates straight to the bottom like a glass blade, there is a nameless city of tiny creatures called exiles. They have a transparent body, 6 silky slender legs, and a feather tail to cling to rocks. From birth, they've been taught a single truth: hold on, or the current will kill you. The elders erected a stone stele engraved thousands of times. Safety is clinging. Freedom's an illusion. Letting go is death. So millions of people who lived all their lives were glued to the rocks, to the moss, to the bones of their dead fellow humans, their eyes wide open, as if they were looking at the water passing over their heads like they were looking at an endless monster. They count the days by the whirlpools, the age by the new moss that grows on the apricots, and the happiness by the strength of the grip. No one dares to raise their heads more than one glove, because just a little loose legs, the water will grab them, hit the rocks, and tear them into hundreds of pieces. Once, a curious child relaxed one leg, was immediately swept away, leaving only a scream swallowed by the water. From there, fear becomes flesh and blood. But among those millions of clings, there was a creature named Lamb. Lamb was no different, with 6 legs and a feather tail, but its eyes were brighter, as if retaining a little moonlight that had been swallowed up by the riverbed long ago. Lamb grew up with the same question that no one dared to ask in words. If the water really wants to kill me, why does it still gently caress the dead? Every night, when the sunlight went out, Lamb lay under the moss, listening to the water whispering above his head like a wordless lullaby. He heard in the sound of the water something that was not killing, but inviting. Lamb began to try to loosen one leg, then 2 legs, then the tail. Each time it was released, its heart wanted to break, but strangely, it didn't die. It just floated up a little, and then the fear shrunk back. Just like that, day after day, month after month, Lamb learned to trust little by little, until one fateful morning, That day, the sun rose bright red, dyeing the whole river into blood. The elders gathered the whole people and declared, "The water is angry. We have to hold on twice as tightly today." Standing in the middle of the crowd, watching the millions of trembling clings, watching newborn babies who have been taught to cling to rocks before they can swim, Lamb suddenly heard a voice in his chest clearly, not of the elder, not of fear, but of the water itself that he had been lying on for so many years. The time has come. Lamb walked out in the middle of the stone square. The murmur emerged like a storm. "It's crazy! It's going to die." Lamb looked around, looked at each pair of frightened eyes, and then said, his voice sounding like a broken bell in the water, "I'm tired of clinging. I don't know what's ahead, but I trust that the water knows its way. I'm going to let go today." The elder shouted, "Don't! You will die a miserable death." Lamb smiled. For the first time in his life, he smiled. "Maybe, but at least I'll live before I die." And it lets go. The 6 legs were opened, the tail of the feathers spread wide, and the small body had nothing to cling to. The water immediately caught it. It was knocked, swirled, smashed into rocks, bones, into moss as sharp as knives. Terrible pain. Purple blood drifted from the transparent body. Lamb thought he was going to die. But then a miracle happened. The more you let go, the less pain it is. The more you don't resist, the gentler the water flows. It stopped cowering, stopped squirming, stopped trying to hold on to even a single piece of rubble. It expands completely, like an underwater flower, and the water lifts it up. No more bumps, no more pain. There is only the feeling of being embraced, being led, being flown. It flew up, through the moss, through the trembling clings, and even the elder who was gasping. It flew to the surface of the water, seeing the real sun for the first time in its life, without passing through the dense water. The light was dazzling, the wind was cool, and the sky was endlessly blue. Flying around, flipping, laughing, laughing loudly, the sound of laughter echoed throughout the river. At the bottom, millions of Liu people raised their heads for the first time in their lives. They see one of their fellow human beings flying, living, free. The cheers rang out, "Savior! The Savior has come!" They knelt down, holding up their trembling clings as if praying. Hearing this, he hurriedly dived down and landed on the rock in the middle of the square. He shouted, his voice crystal clear, "I'm not the Savior. I'm just a dare to let go. The water never wants to kill us. It just wants to lift us up. Let go. Let it all go." But no one dared. They were still kneeling, still begging, "Please save us." Lamb was heartbroken. It flew up one last lap, then plunged straight into the bottom of the river, landing right in front of the elder. "If you want me to save, follow me," he said, then let go of his hand again, letting the water wash away in front of millions of terrified eyes. This time, he was no longer afraid. It soared, higher, farther, over waterfalls, over mountains, beyond even the sky they had never dared to dream of, and it never came back. But the story of Lamb is not lost. It spreads throughout the riverbed, from generation to generation. At first, only a few children dared to relax one leg, then a few hundred, then a few thousand. Every time someone let go, another creature flew to the surface of the water, saw the sun, and then came down to tell the story. Just like that, gradually, the clinging ones decreased. The wings opened. Laughter rang out at the bottom of the crystal river. Until one day, the oldest elder, who once shouted, "Letting go is dead," trembled and relaxed his 6 legs. The water lifted him up, as gently as a child. He flew to the surface, seeing the real light for the first time in his life. He cried. He laughed. He called out loudly, "Lamb is right. Water is not an enemy. It's Mom." And he flew forever, flying forever, until he disappeared at the end of the horizon. At the bottom of the river, there was no grip left. There are only millions of creatures left to fly freely, twinkling like 1,000 stars under the water. They have no more cities, no steles, no elders. Only the river and the wings remain. And somewhere, far away, It is said that if you go to the Crystal River at dawn, you will see millions of light spots rising from the water, like an upside-down starry sky. They're not. They were the exiles who dared to let go. And if you listen closely, you'll hear a voice in the wind. I'm not saving anyone. The river is ready to lift it all, as long as you dare to let go. Letting go is not dying. It's the only way to truly live. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching sheds light on the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives embracing safety and control, believing that our safety depends on holding on to familiar circumstances. However, in this very attachment, we create suffering that we seek to avoid. Why do we cling desperately when the current takes us to unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from childhood, we have learned that what is known is safe and what is unknown is dangerous. This condition becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents development beyond familiar limits. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by embracing circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story of the paradox of absolute truth. This is the lesson of the 20-year-old hermit and two conflicting teachings, Tan Tuok Mountain, the 17th year of Kaiyuan. The fog is so thick that it can be cut out in slices and placed on the tongue. There was a man named Yunji, 30 years old, who had just given up the whole world, his office, his fiancée, his inheritance of 300 acres of land, just to chase a sentence he heard from an old monk on the banks of the Luoshui River. That saying is just 10 words. Buddha is your own mind. Look no further than that. Yun Chen listened as if he had been struck by lightning across his ears. That night, he burned all the great books, sold all the fields, cut his hair, wore a coarse cloth shirt, climbed the Thonduk alone, erected a painting on the cliff, and hung a sign outside the door with only 3 words, Heart of the Buddha. 20 years passed like a blink of an eye, blown away by the mountain wind. Every day he only does 3 things: sit, look at the mind, and reaffirm the old saying. Sitting until your buttocks turned into stones, looking so much that your eyes became 2 unrippling lakes, so affirmed that the phrase Buddha is your own mind turned into a heartbeat, a breath, and a pulse of blood flowing in a vein. He has no name, no past, no desire, only an absolute belief. This mind is the Buddha. The Buddha is this mind. He thought he had reached his destination. He thought he had the moon in his hands. Until one autumn afternoon in the 20th year. The cold wind whistled through the rock crevice like the sound of a demon crying. Yun Shan was sitting in the hut when he heard footsteps. It is rare for someone to reach this height. He opened the door and saw a young monk in a torn brown robe, barefoot with a bamboo stick in his hand and an empty cloth bag on his shoulder. The young monk bowed his head. Venerable, venerable, I came here from Xiangxi Pagoda over 3,000 miles, and I heard that there is a hermit who has not come down the mountain for 20 years, just asking for a question. Yun Chen smiled, the smile of the person who was sure he knew the truth. Just ask. The young monk looked up, his eyes shining like 2 lamps in the mist. What is the highest teaching of great virtue? Yun Chen didn't need to think. His voice sounded like a brass bell. Buddha is your own mind. Don't look anywhere else. The young monk shook his head, gently but firmly. That's wrong. My highest teaching is, Buddha is not your own mind. Yun Chen felt as if someone had pulled all the air out of his chest. 20 years, 10 words, a belief, suddenly burst like a soap bubble hit by a needle. He stood silently in the middle of the door. The cold wind blew through, tearing his clothes and blowing off the Buddha's part. The young monk was still standing there, not smiling, not pitying, just looking straight. Yun Chen trembled and asked, You, say it again. Buddha is not your own mind, Yun Chen shouted. You dare to deny my 20 years of hard training? Do you dare to say that the old monk lied? The young monk put his stick on the ground and sat flat on the cold stone floor. I don't deny the old monk, nor do I deny the 20 years of great virtue. I'm just telling another truth. The finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. Yun Chen felt that the heavens and the earth were turned upside down. He rushed into the pulled out all the manuscripts of 20 years, the yellow pages stained with the words Buddha's mind, and threw them all into the fire. The fire broke out, swallowing every word, every belief, every self that he had built. He sat down in front of the ashes, crying like a child. The young monk was still sitting outside the door, waiting silently. When the fire was extinguished, Yun Chen walked out, his hair disheveled and his eyes red. So, what is Buddha? The young monk pointed to the sky. The full moon had just risen from the top of the mountain, so bright that it melted the fog into milk. Do you see the moon? See. Is it in the heart of great virtue? Yun Chen was dumbfounded. No. Is it outside the mind of great virtue? Yun Chen was dumbfounded again. Not either. The young monk laughed, laughing for the first time. Then don't keep it in your mind and don't push it out of your mind. Just look. Yun Chen looked at the moon. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't try to identify the moon with any concepts. There is no Buddha's mind. No, Buddha is not the mind, not right, not wrong. No, only the moon, and you, and the endless space between the two. Suddenly he understood. 20 years ago, he gave him a finger pointing to the moon. 20 years later, the young monk smashed that finger. Both are true. Both are fingers. No one is the moon. Yun Shan knelt down, dressed the young monk in 3 dresses. The young monk helped him up. What is the great master going to do now? Yun Shan looked at the paintings, at the ashes of scriptures, at the moon, and then at his hand. The hand that once held 10 words as if holding the whole universe. He smiled, his smile as light as the wind. I'm going down the mountain. What are you doing when you go down the mountain? Go find the other person who is clenching your fingers to tell them, don't hold it anymore. Look up to the sky. The young monk nodded, picked up the stick, and turned to walk away. Yun Shan called to him, You haven't told me your name? The young monk did not turn his head. His voice echoed in the mist. I don't have a name. I'm just a smashed finger. The shadow of the brown shirt faded into the blindness. Yun Shan stood there until morning. When the sun rises, he burns the painting, burns the sign, Heart of the Buddha, only keeps a small piece of wood and carves an inscription on it. The finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. Then he went down the mountain. It is said that later, on all the roads of the Tang land, there was an old man in cloth. Wherever he went, he raised his hand and pointed to the sky. When someone asks, Where is the Buddha? The old man just smiled, didn't say anything, just pointed to the moon. If the person was still dazed, the old man took out a small piece of wood from his sleeve and handed it to them to read. Tens of thousands of people have read that piece of wood. Thousands of people let go of their fingers. And hundreds of people have seen the moon. As for Van Titch, he never answered the question, What is Buddha? He only lived, walked, laughed, and pointed to heaven. Until one night of the full moon on the top of Huashan, he was seen sitting flat on a rock, his hands still raised to the sky. The next morning, only the body was cold, and the hand remained in the position of pointing to the moon. The disciples were about to shroud him, but when they took his hand down, they saw a small piece of wood in his palm, engraved with 8 words. Let go of your fingers. You have seen the moon. They buried him on the top of the mountain, without a headstone, without a grave, only with that piece of wood as a marker. Since then, every night when the moon is bright, it is said that if you go to Huashan, you will see an invisible hand raised from the rock, pointing directly at the moon. And if you ask, what is Buddha? There will be a wind blowing through, bringing with it the laughter of an old man who has let go of all teachings. Don't ask me. Let's look up. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let's move on to a story about how customs can outlast their purpose. This is the lesson of the monastic cat over thousands of years. On the top of a distant mountain covered with clouds all year round, there was a small monastery called Shanjiao, located in the middle of a quiet pine forest. That monastery is famous throughout the region because there is an old Zen master who is respected by the world called the Great Master Vientiane. He is not only erudite, but also has a simple soul like the surface of the autumn lake. Every morning, when the dew had not yet dissipated, he sat in meditation under the porch of the temple, his breath blending with the sound of the wind. His eyes seemed to be silent in boundlessness. His disciples came from all over the world, hoping to learn a little wisdom and a little peace from him. In the temple, in addition to people, there is also a cat. It is called Miao Yi. Its fur is as white as snow, and its eyes are as yellow as the new moon. This cat was originally a wild animal, and one day he suddenly entered the monastery, hanging around at the feet of Master Yuanjing. No one knew why he allowed him to stay, only saw him smiling gently, picking up a piece of cake and handing it to him, and whispering, "He is also cultivating, just like me." Since then, Miao Ni has lived with monks. Every meditation session, he used to jump on the pillow, curl up and sleep soundly. At first, the disciples found it adorable, but later, as the number of meditators increased, the cat became a nuisance. It walked around, rubbing one person's legs, chasing the shadow of the other's clothes, making many people unable to concentrate. One day, in the middle of the meditation session, there was a meow sound in the middle of the quiet space, causing a little boy who was meditating to startle and fall. After that session, the disciple came to the teacher. "Master Bai, the cat is harassing us. How do you keep it still?" Master Yuanjing looked at the small animal and then at the disciples. His eyes were still gentle, and his voice was as low as the afternoon breeze. "Tie it up when you meditate." From there, every time it was time to meditate, a soft rope was gently tied around the cat, tied to the porch post. Strangely, when forced, he was obedient, lying still all the time. The meditation hall returned to silence. The meditation continues, the breath blends together, the sound of the wind and the sound of the human heart are no different. Day after month, leash the cat before meditation becomes a habit. Everyone sees it as an indispensable part of the ritual. In the morning, sometimes the bell rings. At noon, spread out the instruments. And before sitting down, you have to tie the cat. Many years have passed. Grandmaster Yuanjing passed away, a smile still at the corners of his lips. The disciple mourned, set up an altar, and kept all the teacher's habits as a legacy. The old and weak cat is still tied every session, as if to continue to cultivate with the teacher. Then one winter, he died quietly on the porch of the temple where he used to sit. The monks took it and buried it under the pine tree and placed a small stone engraved with the words Miao Ni. But since then, whenever it is time to meditate, some people feel absent. Without a cat, many people feel that the meditation session is not full of rituals. A young monk said, "We have to find another cat. If you were alive, you would probably want to do the same." And so they went in search of a new cat. When they found it, they tied it to the porch posts, as in the past. The next generation follows the previous generation. Every meditation session, honeysuckle bells, burning incense, and a soft rope are tied around the cat's body. Gradually, the people who lived later no longer knew the original reason why they had to tie the cat. They only know that that's how the ancestor did it. It's an indispensable meditation ritual. 100 years have passed. The monastery has changed hands many times, and the class of meditators has come and gone. But the ritual of tying the cat remains. Sometimes when the cat escapes, the monks have to send people to the village to find a new cat, because without the cat, they believe the meditation session will lack spiritual energy. There was a year when there was heavy snowfall. The cats died of cold, and the monks had to stop meditating for a few days, waiting to find another child, because without cats, there is no meditation. One day, a young monk who had just entered the monastery looked at the scene of a fat cat being tied on a leash and asked in a daze, "Brother, why do we have to tie a cat when we meditate?" The elder brother frowned. "Don't ask. It's traditional. Since the time of the great master Yuan Jing, it's a symbol of concentration, of stillness, of dominating desire." The little uncle was silent, not daring to ask any more questions, but in his heart there was an unquenchable question. Centuries passed. The Shanxi Monastery became a major center of Eastern Zen learning. Tourists, scholars, and monks from all over come to learn. Everyone knows about the ritual of tying a cat, a sacred tradition that is considered a symbol of supreme wisdom. In the monastery's library, ancient manuscripts have faded, clearly stating every detail. Before meditation, cats must be tied with white silk cords, symbolizing purity. The rope should not be too tight, for excessive detention is ignorance. It must not be too loose, because it is easy to let go. Each of these words is considered as the profound teachings of the ancestors. Then a young scholar named Zhang Yun heard this tradition and decided to go to the mountains to study. He spent 10 years learning the spiritual meaning of tying a cat while meditating. During those 10 years, he read all the scriptures, studied each document, observed each meditation session. He saw the monks solemnly tie the cat with a new rope, recite the mantra, knock on the door, and then sit down to meditate. No one knows why, only that if the ritual is ignored, meditation will lack a soul. Zhang Yun sat in front of the letter. The oil lamp burned until midnight and wrote every word. His thesis is 500 pages thick, titled "The Symbol of Spiritual Control Through the Ritual of Tying Cats in the Shanxi Zen Studies." In it, he affirmed, the cat symbolizes the liberal mind of man. Forcing a cat is the act of controlling the mind, bringing the mind back to calm. The leash is the precept, the concentration, the boundary between the echo and the foot. The text was printed and circulated throughout the monasteries. Scholars everywhere quote, teach, and comment. People even erect a statue of Zen cat in the main hall under the Buddha statue. Many people believe that whoever touches the cat statue before sitting in meditation will quickly settle down. The tradition of tying cats became a sacred ritual maintained for hundreds of years later. However, in a corner of the ancient pagoda, there was an old monk who smiled quietly. His name is Tu Nien, who has lived for more than 80 years in the mountains. One night, when the moon was rising, he told the little uncle an old story about the great master Yuan Jing and the first cat. His voice was as slow as the wind through the forest. In those days, the ancestor tied the cat just because it was disturbing. There is no deep meaning at all. But later generations don't understand. They think it's a sacred ritual. So from a small thing, people make it a ritual and then turn it into a morality. The little uncle listened and was dumbfounded. "So, master, if that's the case, why don't you tell everyone?" Tu Nian smiled gently. "I've said it before, but no one believed it. People prefer to believe in the complex rather than the simple. The truth is so simple, it makes people feel empty. They need rituals to feel like they're cultivating. True cultivation is just sitting down, breathing, and looking deeply into our minds." The wind blew through the forest, and the bright moon illuminated the pagoda's veranda. The little uncle looked at the cat that was tied to lie obediently under the pole and suddenly felt sorry for him. He didn't understand anything about meditation. He didn't know what he was symbolizing for. He only knew how to be tied up every morning. In its golden eyes, reflecting the moonlight and the silhouette of a person. The years passed again. The old monk Tu Nien passed away. Uncle Xiao grew up in the past and became an abbot. On the day of the memorial of the patriarch, people still bring cats to tie, chant, and light incense. In the midst of the sea of silent people, the abbot looked at the white rope, looked at the cat lying still, and his heart suddenly throbbed. It suddenly occurred to him that tradition is not always wisdom. There are things that begin with necessity, but that persist unconsciously become chains. The next day, he quietly untied the rope. The cat stretched its shoulders slightly, yawned, and then walked leisurely out onto the porch, sitting in the sun. The disciples saw this and panicked. "Master, I forgot to tie the cat." He just smiled. "There is no need to tie it anymore." The cat was at peace. So do we. The meditation session that day was unusual. There was no more sound, no more rope. There was only even breathing, only the sound of the wind passing through the tile roof. Some people are nervous at first, but then they gradually realize that silence does not come from tying or not tying, but from within. Since then, the monastery no longer ties cats. Many objected, saying that tradition is being broken. But the abbot remained silent. He knew that time would teach people that wisdom is not in ritual, but in awareness. Then another 100 years passed. The new generation reread the old records and found the 500-page thesis of scholar Zhang Yun. They read, they laugh, and then they understand. The simplest thing is the thing that is covered the longest. The invisible ropes that humans have tied to themselves, blind beliefs, unconscious habits, fears of being wronged, turn out to be even tighter than the rope that was once tied around the little cat. And so, the story of the monastic cat that passed through thousands of years became a metaphor for humanity. Yesterday's temporary solution, if not illuminated by wisdom, can become a meaningless ritual that lasts for centuries. A concrete action to solve a problem, if not understood, turns into spiritual chains. Today, on the old foundation of the Shanzhou Monastery, only a few stones remain, a mossy stele faintly engraved with the words, "Don't tie the cat." Tourists stopped by. Everyone smiled. Few understood the full meaning. But somewhere, in the mountain wind, a faint laughter echoed from thousands of years ago. The laughter of the Zen master Yuanjing, gentle, deep, and free as the cat itself that had been unleashed. Whatever is in line with reason and beneficial to the interests of all, then accept it and live by it. True spiritual maturity involves constantly examining our practices to ensure they serve their intended purpose rather than simply preserving forms as they have become familiar. Let's continue with a story about the limits of understanding and the honesty of not knowing. This is the emperor and Zen master Gudo. In the 13th year of Tianbao, Tuatian Palace, Chang'an. Drizzle fell like silver silk, and the northeast wind blew through Taihua Palace, making the jade curtains jingle like a night cry. Tang Xuantong was 60 years old. His hair was half gray, but his eyes were still as sharp as knives. He built more than 500 temples, offered more than 30,000 gold, and invited all the high monks in the world to the palace to preach the sutras. But every night he dreamed of a deep black hole with no bottom, no light, and he himself was falling forever. Every time he woke up startled, sweating drenched in dragon cells, he called the eunuch. Find someone who knows where he will go after he dies. After 3 years of searching, a Zen master named Gudo from Nanyue Mountain was finally invited. Without a golden palanquin, without a Buddhist monk, he walked, his shirt patched and patched, his straw sandals pierced with holes, and on his shoulder he carried a bamboo stick with a chipped bowl tied. When he entered the Taihua Palace, he did not kneel, did not call himself a poor monk, just stood in the middle of the great hall, looking directly into the emperor's eyes like an ordinary old man. Xuantong sat on a throne 9 feet high, embroidered with golden dragons, holding a jade in his hand, and his voice echoed like thunder. "I heard that you are an enlightened person. I only asked one question. Where will the enlightened person go after death?" The Taihua Palace was silent. 500 courtesans, 300 martial officials, and 100 eunuchs and guards all held their breath. Everyone is waiting for a fancy answer. Western bliss, or nirvana, or the flower blooming to see the Buddha, or at least a four-verse verse that sounds like a silver bell. Gudo scratched his head, yawned, and then replied succinctly, "How do I know?" The whole court seemed to be struck by lightning. The emperor stood up, his dragon shavings rustling. "What did you say?" Gudo shrugged. "How do I know?" Xuantong pointed and trembled. "You are an enlightened person." Gudo laughed, and the laughter echoed throughout the Golden Palace. "That's right, but I'm not dead." The silence lasted long enough to hear the sound of rain falling on the patio. Xuantong felt that the throne under his buttocks suddenly sank like quicksand. Every prayer he heard, every verse he wrote, every gold and silver he offered suddenly turned to ashes. He walked down the stairs and walked in front of Gudo, his voice hoarse. "You dare to say? Don't you know?" Gudo looked him straight in the eye. "Has your majesty ever died?" "Not yet." "Then how does your majesty know?" Xuantong stiffened his throat. He asked thousands of high priests, none of whom dared to answer like that. Some people say, about the Pure Land. Some people say, the biochemistry of Death Tang. Some say, entering nirvana is no longer going anywhere. They all answered firmly, as if they were dead and came back to tell the story. Gudo continued, his voice as soft as the wind. "Your Majesty is afraid of death, so you want a definite answer to be less afraid. But that certainty is only the certainty in your head, not the truth. I'm not selling fake certainty. I'm just selling the truth. I'm not dead, so I don't know." Xuantong suddenly found himself naked in the middle of the great hall. The dragon bow, the jade billion, the throne, 50 years as a heavenly prince, suddenly couldn't hide the small fear in his heart. Fear of death, fear of not knowing. He knelt on the cold stone floor, tears falling on the borage tiles. "Please teach me, what should I do to stop being afraid?" Gudo sat down in the middle of the palace, without a group, and told the emperor to sit down opposite. He took out a dried apple from his sleeve and handed it to Xuantong. "Your Majesty, eat it." Xuantong held the apple, hesitating. Gudo said, "Eat, don't think about it." Xuantong took a bite. The taste was sour and dry, but strangely, he felt every apple grain touching his tongue, every chewing sound in his ears, every breath in and out of his nose. Gudo asked, "Where is your Majesty?" "Dang, eat apples." "When you eat apples, does your Majesty think about death?" "No, that's enough." Xuantong looked up, his tears still not dry. "Is that all?" Gudo nodded. "When your Majesty thinks about death, just eat an apple. When the apples run out, chop the firewood. When we run out of firewood, sweep the yard. When the yard runs out, sleep. When I wake up, I eat apples again, and so on until death. At that time, you will naturally know where to go." Xuantong smiled, the first smile in 3 years without dreams. He called the eunuch. "Command, from now on there is no need for more pagodas, no more sutras, no more gold offerings in the palace. Just bring me an apple every day." Gudo stood up, picked up his cane, and turned to the door. Xuantong called out, "Where are you going?" "About the mountains. I have to live for the rest of my life." "Aren't you afraid of death?" Gudo turned around, winking. "I'm afraid, but I'm busy eating apples." The shadow of the patched shirt is hidden after the drizzle. 3 years later, Huyantong abdicated, giving up the throne to the crown prince. He moved to a small pond by Tai Ditch Lake, planted an apple tree with his own hands. Every day he eats one fruit, sweeps the yard once, chops a bundle of firewood, and sleeps once. No menstrual periods, no shelter, no asking anyone where they will go after death. In the 14th year of the heavenly treasure, in autumn, yellow apple leaves fell all over the yard. The old emperor sat under the tree, holding the last apple in his hand, took a bite and smiled. Then he lay down and slept. No more dreaming. He was found dead, still holding an apple in his hand and a smile on his lips. In his sleeve, there was a small piece of paper, and the handwriting trembled. "I have eaten all the apples. Now here we go. I don't know where to go, but I'm very happy." The apple tree is still alive, and it still bears fruit every season. It is said that if you go there on a moonlit night, you will see an old man in cloth sitting under a tree, holding an apple in his hand, smiling. If you ask, "Where do you go after you die?" the old man will hand the apple to you, saying, "Eat it. When you eat all the apples, you will know by yourself. And if you dare to take a bite, you will hear laughter echoing in the wind. I'm not dead, so I don't know, but I'm living, so I'm not afraid." In a world full of false certainties and confident ignorance, the honesty of the teacher, I should know how to point to a more authentic relationship with mystery, a relationship that respects the unknown while fully embracing what can be experienced firsthand. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us discover a story of true spiritual power. This is the story of the miracle of ordinary life. In the 9th year of Nguyen Hua, Tiantai Pagoda, Tianmu Mountain, the Vulan festival had just ended, and more than 300 monks and nuns from all over the Great Hall gathered in the green stone lecture hall to listen to the annual Dharma talk. On that day, people await the Master Shinshu, the high monk famous for his miraculous stories about his ancestors. Shinshu walked up to the court, wearing a crimson robe, holding a jade-inlaid staff in his hand, and his voice sounded like a bronze bell. "Do you want to hear the truest miracle of our Linji lineage?" The whole lecture hall nodded in disbelief. Shinshu said slowly, "Once upon a time, my ancestor, the great master Shuangguang, stood on the bank of the Qingjiang River, which was more than 20 staves wide. On the other side of the river, the people were starving because of the loss of crops. They begged for a mantra to pray for rain. The ancestor didn't say anything, just mixed the chusha with water, then raised the quill pen one staff away from the air, and wrote in the void 4 large words: 'One heart returns.' As soon as the words were finished, the dark clouds came, the thunder flashed, and the rain poured down like a silver waterfall. The people on the other side of the river could clearly see every bright red letter hanging in the sky, then melting into the rain. That is the true divine power of the enlightened being." The whole hall roared in astonishment. Some people knelt down and bowed, some folded their hands in confession, and some cried because they were moved. Shinshu smiled with satisfaction. His eyes swept around as if he wanted to collect 1,000 pairs of eyes to admire him. Suddenly, from the corner of the lecture hall, a soft laugh rang out. It's light, but it's enough to silence thousands of people. It was Bankai, an unknown Zen master, dressed in coarse cloth and barefoot, sitting on a pole, holding a bitten dumpling. Everyone knew him. He swept the temple grounds for more than 30 years, did not preach sutras, did not ordain, only cooked rice, swept leaves, and laughed. Shinshu frowned. "What are you laughing at?" Bankai swallowed the last of the dumplings, brushed the crumbs off his hands, and then slowly stood up and walked out into the middle of the lecture hall. He didn't go to the court, just stood on the ground, looking directly at Shinshu, his voice as light as the breeze. "My miracle is very normal." The whole hall was curious. Bankai continued, "When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm thirsty, I drink. When I'm tired, I sleep. When I woke up, I swept the yard. Today I was hungry, I ate this dumpling. After eating, I felt full. It's my miracle." Silent. It was so quiet that I could hear the sound of leaves falling on the porch. Shinshu sneered. "That's what everyone does. What is called a miracle?" Bankai nodded. "That's right. Everyone does. But who knows I'm working a miracle?" He turned to the masses, his voice as warm as fresh rice. "Do you remember the last time I ate without thinking about anything? Don't think about the sutras that you don't know. Don't think about the enemies that haven't been forgiven. Don't think about merit that isn't enough. Don't think about the death that awaits. Only eat." He only knew hot rice. He only knew the sweetness of rice. He only knew that his tongue was chewing and his throat was swallowing. What were you doing at that time? You are living. and living a full piece of rice is the greatest miracle in the universe. A little boy sitting in the front row burst into tears. He remembered. This morning he ate rice and thought about the upcoming exam, swallowed the gold in a hurry, and the rice fell all over the bowl without knowing what it tasted like. Bankai continued. Shinshu's ancestor wrote across the river, and he was very good. But if the ancestor is hungry and there is no one to offer rice, will the divine power help the ancestor to be full? If the ancestor is thirsty without water, can the quill pen write the word Kamlo to drink? The real miracle is that when you are hungry, you have food. When you are thirsty, you have water. And when you are tired, you have a bed. And those things right now are here. He raised his hand and pointed to the ground. You are sitting on this wooden floor, breathing with this air, listening with this ears. Who gave you these things? Not a divine power, not the master. It's just the earth, the wind, and this body. And yet you ignore it. Where to look for miracles? Shinshu turned pale, but still tried to keep his voice down. Eating rice and drinking water is also done by children. How does it compare to the divine power of a saint? Bankai laughed. Children do it without knowing they're doing miracles. Adults know, but don't do it. So children are one step higher than adults. He walked up to Shinshu and gently placed his hand on the high monk's shoulder. Shinshu, today I told you the story of the ancestor who wrote the letters across the river. What will the masses think after hearing it? Thinking that you have to cultivate very high to have divine powers. Think that I am too poor. Thinking that I have to train hard for another 100 years. So he ran after the shadow of the master all his life, forgetting that he was living. As for me, I just ate this dumpling. It's full. It's fun. It's done. Don't run after anyone. No comparison with anyone. No waiting. That's why I'm free. The whole lecture hall was silent. Then a cry rang out. It was an 80-year-old monk who had been practicing for 70 years and was on his knees, tears falling down his robes. I have been practicing for 70 years just to be able to write across the river. It turns out that I missed 70 years of eating. The cry spread. Dozens and hundreds of people cried. They cry because they remember. After many years of meditation, their minds have run away. For many years, chanting the sutra, the ears did not hear the sound of the sutra. For many years, I have eaten vegetarian rice, but my mouth does not know the taste. Bankai didn't say anything more. He quietly walked out to the temple yard, took a bamboo broom, and began to sweep the leaves. Each stroke of the broom was slow and even, and the sound of dry leaves touching the ground could be clearly heard. That night, no one wanted to go back to the lecture hall. They sat down, without lights, without menstruation, just eating dinner together. A bowl of white rice, a plate of boiled vegetables, a cup of filtered water. No one talks. Only chewing, swallowing, breathing sounds are heard, and the happy cries of those who tasted life for the first time. Shinshu also stayed. He left the high court, sat on the ground, held a bowl of rice, and ate slowly every spoonful. When he finished eating, he got up and went to look for Bankai. Bankai was sitting under a Bodhi tree, holding a cup of hot tea. Shinshu knelt down. I understand. The greatest miracle is not to write words across the river. It's to be able to drink this tea and know that you're drinking. Bankai handed the cup of tea to Shinshu. Drink it. The tea is cold. Shinshu drank. The water is warm. The taste is slightly bitter, the aroma of old leaves. He smiled. The first smile in his life did not need anyone to compliment. The next morning, it was found that Shinshu's high court had been lifted. Instead, there was only a low table in the middle of the lecture hall, on which was placed a bowl of white rice, a cup of tea, and a dumpling. Next to it is a small board with rustic handwriting. Today's miracle: eat when you're hungry, drink when thirsty, live while alive. Bankai no longer sweeps the field. He had lost that night, sitting under a Bodhi tree, still holding an empty cup of tea in his hand, his mouth still covered with a smile. They buried him right under the tree, without beer, without prayers, only a branch of fresh bodhisattva. Every year until that day, monks and nuns come back from all over the world, not preaching sutras, not preaching the Dharma, just eating a meal together. They called that day the Bankai eclipse. And every time they finished eating, they heard the slight laughter of the old man sweeping the leaves echoing in the wind. Miracle here. Don't look far. Life is not a straight path full of light. It is a winding journey between illusions, beliefs, and desires that people try to hold on to feel that they exist and have meaning. But the more we go, the more we realize much of our pain doesn't come from the outside world, but from our own inner resistance, our inability to accept what it is. 9 stories are like 9 hammer blows, each one shattering the hard shell we call the self. And then in the end, only one question is left that quietly echoes in the void. Life doesn't ask you what you want. It just asks, are you ready to love what's happening? At first, we think we live to achieve something, a dream, a success, a beautiful image of ourselves. We pursue our ambitions, cling to our ideals, and try to bend everything to our liking. But when we achieve it, we feel empty. When we lose, we feel pain. Everything is like a joke of fate. We blame life, others, ourselves, without seeing that suffering is just a shadow of resistance, a shadow of our never learning to love what is happening. In that journey, 9 stories are like 9 mirrors. There is the story of the Zen master and the thief, where compassion turns violence into light. There is the story of the monastic cat, where unconscious habits become rituals that bind over thousands of years. There is a story of a Buddhist student looking for the Buddha, going everywhere looking for it, and finally realizing that the Buddha has never left his mind. There is the story of the child who lost his toy, cried all night, only to see the sun shining brightly through the doorway, and he laughed. These stories are not meant to teach, not to force us to believe, but to awaken. Each blow of the hammer is a bell, knocking on the walls of the mind. Everyone has a thief in them, the instinctive, fearful, greedy part that always robs us of our own peace. And there is also the Zen master in him, the clear, calm part that knows how to smile even before the storm. When the Zen master said to the thief, "If you take the money, you must be thankful," he is not only talking about kindness, but also pointing out the profound truth. When we are awake enough to love the opposite, the other person immediately disappears, leaving only our own reflection. The thief realized that kindness could not be measured in words, and for a moment, he saw himself. He cried, not because he was sorry, but because the wall in his heart had just collapsed. The first blow has come down. Unconditional love is the greatest transformative force. Then there was the cat of the monastery. It's forced for just one small reason, so as not to disturb meditation. But humans, over time, turn it into a sacred ritual. They forget the purpose, only the form remains. The leash that binds the cat has, over thousands of years, become a symbol of the human mind itself. We bind ourselves with habits, with fear, with ignorant beliefs, and then forget why we do it. The second hammer strikes. Break the shackles of custom. Do not let tradition take the place of awareness. The story of the Buddhist student finding the Buddha is the third hammer blow. He left home, crossed the forest and crossed the mountains, worshipped everywhere, read all the sutras, and still saw the Buddha far away. One day, exhausted, he sat resting by the stream and saw his image reflected in the water. The wind swayed slightly, the water surface rippled, and the shape disappeared and returned. He suddenly understood. Buddha is not far away. Buddha is this mind. When it is quiet, it is bright. When it is moving, it is blurry. In that moment, all searches stopped. He laughed. There is nothing to achieve, only return. The third blow, shattering the illusion of the goal of enlightenment. Then there is the story of a mother who lost her child, sitting and crying in front of the temple gate. The Zen master pointed his hand to the sky. "On the other branch, the leaf just fell. Your child is the same." She looked, tears flowed, and then suddenly felt light. Life is inherently uncontrollable. The more it holds on, the more it hurts. True love is not in possession, but in the ability to let go with gratitude. The fourth blow shatters the illusion of forever. Another student came and asked the teacher, "I want to be peaceful. What should I do?" He replied, "Let go." He asked, "Let go?" The teacher laughed. "That's what you're asking." That answer is like the fifth hammer, shatters the illusion that there is someone who needs enlightenment. The questioner and the question dissolved together, leaving only silence. Then there is the story of the man rowing the boat in the mist. When another boat collided, he angrily scolded. But as he got closer, he realized that the boat was empty. He laughed. Many times he was angry and resentful. It was only because he thought that someone else had hurt him. But in reality, every collision is just a life that flows on its own. No one is to be angry about. The sixth hammer blow, shattering the illusion of the enemy. A king once asked how to rule justly. The Zen master replied, "First of all, rule your mind." The king pondered and then realized, if the mind is full of anger, then no matter what law is given, it will lead to injustice. The seventh hammer blow shatters the illusion that the outside world needs to be fixed first. The eighth story is about the artist who wanted to paint the painting Absolute Peace. He painted the meadows, the calm sea, the clear sky, but he said not enough. He wandered for years until he saw a fierce storm. In the middle of it, there was a small bird's nest, the mother bird incubating her eggs. He brightened. Peace is not the absence of storms, but peace of mind in the midst of storms. The painting is complete, and he also completes himself. The ninth and the last is the story without words, only the mirror. The Taoist asked the teacher, "After you have destroyed all the illusions, what is left?" The teacher held up the mirror, "And you." The learner sees his face, but it is different. No name, no past, no desire. It's just that life is looking back at itself. 9 hammer blows, 9 collapses, 9 resurrections. Each time a layer of illusion falls, the world gets bigger. When there is no more searching, no more comparing, no longer resisting, we begin to see life as it is, full, vivid, holy in its own ordinary. And then, in the middle of that space, the last sentence sounded like an echo from the depths of his heart. Life doesn't ask you what you want. It just asks, are you ready to love what's happening? That sentence does not promise anything, does not advise, does not comfort. It points directly at the heart of all human suffering, the opposition to reality. We always think that happiness comes from making things just the way they are. But the truth is, happiness only comes when we stop demanding, when we open our hearts to what is. When we love the things we used to hate, the world changes color. When we accept the pain, it melts into understanding. When we see impermanence without fear, we begin to be free. Love here is not a romantic emotion, but a tolerant energy, something that is not selective, that does not demand. It is like a lake, whether it is mud or flowers thrown into it, it still reflects the sky. And so, after 9 stories, we return to the very place where we began, but differently. No more trying to change his life, no more arguing about right and wrong, just a light breath, a small smile, a transparent look. Freedom is not doing what you want, but being at peace even if you don't want to happen. Life is no longer an antagonist, but a great friend. It doesn't need me to conquer, I just need to open my heart. Because every event, whether it's loss or joy, is how it whispers, I'm teaching you to love a little deeper. When we understand that, we stop asking, why is this happening? But just breathe and smile. Thank you for coming. At that time, hammer blows are no longer necessary. The wall of illusion has dissolved. Only freedom remains, as vast as a lake, as big as the sky, as your own heart right now.